Good evening and welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting for Livonia Public Schools for April 15th, 2024. Tonight's agenda is a good one and we're going to get started. On item 1, audience communications. I don't have any blue slips and I don't see anybody out that's looking to speak, so we're going to move on to item number 2, the Committee of the Whole, and that is for me. So we're going to go with 2A, bylaws of the board, board operations, and we're going to look at policy or code of ethics, BHA, code of ethics. Last week at our study session, we discussed this. We made some tweaks and changes to our code of ethics, and this is a document that the entire board will sign after we approve any changes that we would like to make, and we'll be doing that at the regular meeting next week. So is there any, do you want me to just go through and go through the changes? Okay. So we're looking at underneath the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th bullet point. We are going to go ahead and it says, I will review and evaluate all board policies, bylaws, procedures, and processes of the board, and will work to make desired changes so that they will be current, relevant, and in accordance with state and or federal laws. And then we added, I will review all administrative procedures and give input to the superintendent. Mrs. Bonifield.
So, thinking about that last sentence and looking back on it, is the administrative procedures are really not in our purview. And although it's maybe something that we need to do or want to do, it's not really part of our responsibilities, yet we're adding it to our policy. So I don't, is it confusing? Is it opening the door for, anyway, that's it. I just.
Yeah, Mrs. Frank.
I agree in that, and, sorry. I agree with that, with Mrs. Bonifield, and because we're not reviewing all administrative policies, we're only reviewing the ones that are brought to the board, right? Like, because the board policies are, I can't get to, technically I can't get to them, right? You have to, administrative procedures are not on the website.
Yes, they are. No, they are.
Oh, that's right. But do we want them to review? But I guess we're saying we review all the, I'm not sure.
Okay, Mrs. Burton.
The reason for some of the changes that were made in this, specifically to capitalize board policies and to capitalize bylaws, actually, what I would suggest too is that it's bylaws of the board, because that is the specific title of the bylaws of the board. So we need to add of the board after bylaws and leave bylaws capitalized. And then procedures, we need to remove the comma after the word procedures so that it reads procedures and processes of the board. And the whole point of those changes were to make certain that board members knew that those were the specific documents that we have the responsibility for reviewing and approving, as opposed to any procedures or processes that we find, because the rest of them aren't our purview. Mrs. Bonifield, you make a good point. The administrative procedures that we do have the responsibility to at least read and give input on are those that are contained within the board policy book, I believe. I mean, that was my understanding, and that was my purpose in saying that, in pulling that out separately, because we don't have the right to approve those. We only have the right and the responsibility to give input on them. But perhaps along your line, we could say, I will review all administrative procedures contained within the board policy book and give input to the superintendent. Because we don't have the right to be digging around in principals' administrative procedures and other administrators' procedures.
Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you. I was going to say, I think the intent was, as you were saying, Mrs. Burton, that it's not something that we approve, but that we give input. And my 2 cents would be to say give input to the superintendent as necessary, because it
a good
doesn't mean
idea.
that we have to always review and give input. It's not always necessary, but if we have, then it's not something that we approve, but we just kind of give input to the superintendent.
So you're saying if we include, so it would read, I will review all administrative procedures contained within the board policy book and give input to the superintendent where necessary.
Yes.
Mrs. O'Quist?
I normally wouldn't weigh in because, of course, these are the board's bylaws, but I wonder if this may help. It says all administrative procedures, and that's pretty significant because we have 600 policies and a good number of them. What about if it have administrative procedures? What about if it said, I will review administrative procedures being created, reviewed, and/or updated, and give input on them to the superintendent?
When necessary.
I would just say,
Oh, yeah, we
if
don't
it's,
need
if it's
when
on
necessary,
ones
right?
that are being created, being reviewed, or being updated, that's when we would be looking for input.
Yeah.
And we wouldn't necessarily expect the board to be continuously just reviewing them.
Yes.
But certainly when we do, we are looking for your input when we bring one forward, or when brought forward, or something like that.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I agree with Mrs. Burton that, and with Mrs. Frank as well, that this is actually reviewing administrative procedures is out of our purview. That's just not part of our day-to-day, what the board does. It is part of what administration does. And to that end, I see this as no different than reviewing anything else that administration brings to us, whether it's a bid request, a budget, anything. This is a similar sort of thing. They bring it to us as a courtesy, they bring it toward us to review, but I would not even include it in our bylaws any more than I would include bringing a bid request. This is something that is presented to us as part of an administration presenting whatever the topic is, whether it's a policy that we're considering. But it is not, I don't see that it needs to be addressed separately in our bylaws.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
And I'm gonna, Mrs. Jarvis, I pointed out the same thing I was going to, is that technically, it's brought to us as a courtesy, in that we have no authority or responsibility. As a courtesy, and because, we're steeped in the district, and we all have opinions, right? We chat about it, and I know some of the stuff that we've been doing, we've gotten pretty deep into it, but as a general rule, it's not really, it's only brought to us as a courtesy, rather than when we review a policy, we may or may not see the administrative procedure. I mean, we can always go look it up, but it's not always brought to us for review. So I find that it's not, and
Okay.
I'm
Yeah, I
not
don't know
gonna
that we
hold
need
up
it.
on anything on this. That's just,
Yeah.
it's not a do or die.
Mrs. Burton?
I can live with it either way, but the reason that I think that it should be in there, and Mrs. Oquist, I do agree with removing the word all, but I do think that it should be in there because they are contained within the board policy book, and I want it clear that we don't have the right to vote on those. I'm not concerned about the 7 who sit at this table right now. I'm looking for people who are down the road from us. But I would like it clear that we don't have the right to vote on those, and that's the reason that I think it should be in there.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
So, the way now that we've had a little bit of time to sleep on it, when I read this, it makes it sound like I'm supposed to be meddling in the administrative procedures when I read this. And maybe we just need to be explicit and say in here, the administrative procedures are not our responsibility, rather than saying I'm going to read them or I'm going to give feedback, because to me that's opening the door to say to exactly somebody that's not one of the 7 of us, I get to go hog wild because I don't like the way they administer some of this, right? And so then I'm going to constantly give feedback. I think if we're going to put it in there for the reason that it's explicit that we don't vote on this, that we say we don't vote on administrative procedures.
I'm comfortable with that, but you're saying the board will not vote on administrative procedures.
Or the
Does
board
that-
does not vote on administrative procedures or something like that.
Or when requested, I will review and give input, but the board does not vote on procedures, or something like that.
Yeah,
That's
we
fine,
can
because we,
word-
because we do
we can
review.
wordsmith
And we do
it.
want your input, and that
Yep.
is, it is part of board policy. It just
Yeah.
simply doesn't, it doesn't require a vote. But I do think the input on it, it has been
It's valuable.
important. It's been really
Agreed.
important. So it could say something like, when requested, I will review administrative procedures brought forth and give input to the superintendent. You know, however, the board does not vote on provide, or
Yeah.
vote,
Vote to
vote
approve those items.
approve. Yeah.
I can live with that.
Yeah, that would be
I like
great.
that.
I like that. I think it covers both areas. It does define what we do and we don't do.
Yeah.
Changes here. There's crossouts on the will, so make
Oh,
sure you
yeah.
recognize those.
Oh, yeah, okay, thanks. Okay, everybody's good with that, and
Yep.
we have it recorded how we would like it?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes. When requested, I will review administrative procedures brought forth and give input to the superintendent, semicolon, however, comma, the board does not vote to approve administrative procedure.
I like that a lot.
okay.
That works.
Sound good? Everybody's in agreement?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Johnson did say there's a strikeout on the one before. Instead of "I will recognize that the role of the board is to govern and oversee," right above, we're just going to say "I recognize." We're going to strike that out.
Yep.
Okay, so we're moving down the way, and the few bullet points down, we're also doing a strikeout under "I will understand that I have not only the right but the duty to express my views and opinions and ask questions at the board table." We're striking "will" out, just to make I understand. Underneath that, we're striking out "will." Under that, I recognize that the board must make decisions as a whole in public, so that we're going to just say "I recognize."
Yep.
Okay, go into the next page. Second one down, again, we're gonna strike out "I will" and recognize, and just say "I recognize that while I'm free to express my personal views, the board president is a spokesperson for the board and the superintendent is a spokesperson for the district." All right, moving down a couple more, we're going to insert, this sentence says, "I will communicate to other board members and the superintendent expression of public reaction of note to board policies and school programs." Okay. Everybody's good with
So in my email
that?
on that, I had recommended,
Yeah.
based on the conversation that we had, that there maybe was, needed to be some additional clarity the board was seeking on any expression, or I think the board was looking at more significant expression. You'd certainly
Yep.
want to let us know so that we can begin addressing that.
Okay.
Although, as we read it, I'm wondering if we
don't know.
need some punctuation in there that would.
Yes.
I don't know if it
Communicate to the
sounds
board
right.
members
I don't know.
and The superintendent.
Mrs. Jarvis?
I like the way that Mrs. Oquist just said it. Board members and superintendent, significant expressions of public reaction to board policies.
Oh, to insert significant?
Right,
board
and
members?
take out of note. Of note is kind of awkward there. But significant expressions, I'd make it plural. Significant expressions of public reaction to board policies and school programs.
And strike out "of note."
Yes.
Is everybody okay with that?
I can live with that.
That could be either a lot of them or just really strong.
Right.
Yep.
Right, it could
Okay.
be one person, but they
Right.
might
Mhm.
be very
Right.
emphatic.
And Audrey needs to know that.
Sure.
Okay.
Makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so that, we've got that covered. All right, moving down. Under, as board president, on the second bullet, we've inserted the word "disruptive." So it will say, "I will advise persons addressing the board to do so in a respectful manner and not allow rude, disruptive, or indecent behavior, profane or indecent discourse to be directed to the board, superintendent, or others during board meetings." Mrs. Bonnefield.
So this is specifically talking about people who are addressing us, right? Who are at the podium.
Well, or in the audience at any
Well,
time.
and
be
that's what
anybody.
my question was, is would they be
Oh.
considered someone that's addressing the audience if we've got, there's cheering or jeering or inappropriate remarks, does this cover that where we would be comfortable addressing that to the group as a general? Because I know we're usually pretty soft on that. There've been times when we've gavelled and said, y'all gotta be respectful when they're commenting during someone's address, but sometimes it gets pretty disruptive and distracting when there's in-between speakers. There's a lot of
Clapping.
disruption.
Yeah. Mrs. Jarvis?
I think that Mrs. Bonifield's making an excellent point. Perhaps in front of the word persons, we could say, I will advise attendees and persons addressing the board.
Oh,
Or can we just say
Mrs. Bonifield.
can we just say attendees of the meeting, and which would include people addressing the board, or is that too general?
Mrs. Burton?
The word disruptive may just require a second sentence, because this first one really does come out of state law, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And therefore, maybe we ought to just take disruptive out of that sentence. It's still important, and we still need to address it, but I think it needs its own sentence then. I will advise, let me see here, I will not permit disruptive behavior in the board meetings.
And we'll address persons exhibiting such behavior or something.
Okay, so at the beginning, I will address,
No, I would take the word disruptive out and leave
Okay.
the first sentence as it stands.
and then
As
the
a second sentence, because this is specifically a responsibility of the president.
Right.
I will not permit disruptive behavior. And will advise,
Okay.
and we'll advise all attendees, as you suggested, Mrs. Bonifield, and as such.
Okay.
And we
Can you read that sentence one more time?
I will not permit disruptive behavior, and will advise all attendees as such. We can massage that a bit
Okay.
over the next, because we will have this meeting and we'll have the meeting after that before we vote on it and
Okay.
sign on it. So we've got to think about that.
Do we want to put during the meeting, or is that just assumed?
Nothing is assumed, so again.
I will not permit disruptive behavior.
During the board.
You're right.
During our
During
board, during board
public
meeting.
meeting or something.
During the
During
public
board
meeting.
meetings.
Yeah,
During
during,
board
the-
But now you're being repetitive,
Okay.
well, it says, yeah, because,
because at the end of the first sentence, it says during board meetings, and if you do it
Yep.
again, you're being you're
Yep.
being,
Well, and also,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean that.
quite frankly, I think people are addressing the board during the meeting, but there can be disruptive
Right, that's why it's
behavior
separate
before
sentence.
and after the meeting, so I don't know necessarily think that,
Mhm.
I wouldn't necessarily qualify that to during a meeting, because we have call to order and we have a
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
dismissal, and we don't, if somebody's being disruptive before or after, they can go, oh, it says during board meetings.
Yes,
We're
you're right.
not.
Mm-hmm.
you're right. Mrs. Acosta?
So I'm kind of reading this as we're looking at what the board president's responsibilities are, and not necessarily what our expectations of audience members is. So I don't know how much we want to put in there regarding audience members' behavior, because this is specific to board president's responsibilities.
Mrs. Burton?
That's a good point, but it is the president's responsibility to assure that the meeting is not disrupted, which is why it has to go here. I mean, it can also go in other places in policy. And it's a good idea that we check and make sure that it's in there. But I think it does need to go as board president. It is one of that person's responsibilities. Like
Anybody
it or not.
else?
Yeah.
Okay, so it would read, I will advise persons addressing the board to do so in a respectful manner and not allow rude or indecent behavior, profane or indecent discourse to be directed to the board, superintendent, or others during board meetings. And then the next sentence would say,
I will not permit disruptive behavior and will advise attendees as such.
okay,
And we can work on
Yeah.
that sentence
okay,
between now and the next meeting.
okay. Any other questions?
Just a
Burton?
real quick question. Mrs. Oquist, we jumped off of it pretty quickly, but back up at the first one that we discussed regarding board, bullet point 5, board policies, bylaws of the board. Did you get that we're going to take the comma out?
Yes.
Right after procedures?
Remove the comma after procedure.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other?
I did want to ask for
Yes.
clarity's sake, the final bullet before you begin as board president. So where it says, you'll review, revise, and sign this code of ethics annually at the beginning of each year. Do you want calendar year or school year? And could we clarify that just for
That's a
future?
great
It's
idea.
usually been calendar year.
Yes, it's
It has
usually
been.
calendar.
Is that when you would like it to be, or would you like it after the organizational meeting in July? Either one is fine.
Mrs. Burton?
I would say at the beginning of the calendar year, because that's when we bring new board members on,
Right.
and it's important that they
Yes, good
Agreed.
point.
are
Great.
Yes.
agreeing to the code of ethics.
May
So
I add
each
calendar in
That would
there?
be great, thank you, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Good catch. Anything else that anybody wants to address regarding the code of ethics? Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. This is kind of persnickety. On that same one, the one about the code of ethics, I think it would flow better if we say, I, along with my fellow board members, will review, revise, and sign. In other words, take the word will and put it with revise, because we have so many commas there and it gets messy.
After members.
I can live with
Well.
that.
Oh,
I
okay,
like
so I, comma, along with my fellow board members, will, comma, review, revise, and sign?
No,
No
will
comma
review.
after will.
Will review, comma.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's what it would be. All right? Okay, so these will be put on the regular meeting, and we will be reading them out loud at our next meeting. And voting on them, or no?
No,
This is a
this,
first
it'll be a
read.
first reading.
Okay, it'll be a first read. Okay, first read coming up at the regular meeting. Okay, any other questions regarding that? Okey dokey. All right, we're done with number 2, Committee of the Whole. We're going to move on to 3, the Finance Committee. Mrs. Bonnefield?
I have nothing on the agenda this evening. Superintendent Oquist?
We do not.
Well, that concludes the Finance Committee. Oh, Mrs. Burton?
I just have one quick comment. In light of the news around our southeast Michigan, I just would like, and I don't normally, well, I'll speak for myself. I would like to thank our superintendent, our director of finance, Mrs. Allison Smith, and our team for making certain that our one-time dollars were spent on one-time expenses, and to continue to keep this district in a position where we have a healthy fund balance. We have very large, notable districts that are nowhere near our financial stability right now, and that's because we are not in their boat because of sound decisions that you folks have made and recommendations that you have brought to the Board of Education. It is very, very appreciated.
Here, here.
Thank you, Mrs. Burton, well said. Moving on to item 4, Curriculum Committee. I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you, President Bradford. Item 4A is the 2024-2025 cooperative agreements, and we have Mr. Etu and Ms. Sproul.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Now I'm green, there we go. All right. So I come to you today, we talked last week at our study session a little bit about the Livonia Transition Program. I come to you today asking that we renew our cooperative agreements that we have for the transition program. I'll just real briefly go over a little bit about the transition program as a reminder. It's an amazing program, and I speak with a whole lot of prejudice here toward that wonderful program that supports our young adult learners who have exited high school but still continue to have educational needs. The program is designed to help students learn about activities of daily living, about job readiness skills, and about engagement in their community. So it was initially designed as a Livonia Public Schools program, but word got out quickly, I think, that it is such a fantastic program that we have many area school districts that want to partner with us to provide this great service for their students. So for next year, we're looking at 64 students. Half of those are Livonia Public Schools students, and half of those would be from cooperative agreements from neighboring districts. So we have 32 students that would be part of our cooperative agreements, the largest of which is with Northville. They'd like to send at least 10 students, and just heard about another student potentially as well. So Northville's our biggest feeder school district, and then Redford Union follows them closely, along with 7 other districts as well that support, or that would like to work with us with these cooperative agreements. There is no change in the agreement. It continues to be the same as last year. And I think those are the highlights of the program.
Question? Any questions? Mrs. Burton?
Just making sure there are no significant changes in the agreement from last year to this year, pretty much other than dates, is that correct?
That's exactly true. There are no changes, just an update on the year for the
Okay, thank you.
agreement. Yep.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Etu.
My turn. Similar to LTP, LCTC, our Livonia Career Technical Center, has cooperative agreements with 6 local school districts or schools. It's a Career Technical Education Center. Has roughly over 800 students that attend, high school students, juniors, and seniors. And this upcoming year, right now, currently, we have over 1,100 Livonia Public School students requesting a seat over at the Career Center. So we will look closely in terms of those numbers, those seats, but we do annually do cooperative agreements with 6 local school districts. We have 21 students out of district that are enrolled at the Career Center this year. 19 are from Northville and 2 are from Plymouth Christian Academy. But again, because of our high interest and high requests from LPS students, we'll see where we are in terms of seats available for our out of district students. But we are looking to renew those cooperative agreements. And again, similar to LTP, it's the same agreement as the previous year, just the dates changed.
Comments, questions? Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Costa. And I'm just trying to make sure I understand. I'm looking at the, what we charge, and it says for the LCTC, an amount of, is approximately 50% of the FTE. In the case of an LTP student, an additional $8,000 per student is charged. So you get the FTE plus $8,000?
That's correct.
And we've got 32 non-LPS students in the transition program.
That's correct.
Okay, so my math is correct. Thanks.
And if we can, we'd like to request this on the consent agenda for next week at the voting meeting.
Everybody is good with that?
Thank you. I just want to say thank you again for all the work that you do to make these partnerships work and offering these opportunities to our surrounding districts. Oops. Item 4B is LCTC technology purchases. Mr. Etu, take it away.
Yes, we have another opportunity to purchase equipment through our 61A CTE equipment grant for purchases over $5,000. This would be through contract pricing. Livonia Career Technical Center is looking to purchase new Chromebooks, new Chromebook carts, and Google Chrome EDU licenses for general use within the Career Center and within specific classrooms. There's quotes attached in your board book. We're looking to put a Chromebook cart with license in the criminal justice program, a Chromebook, or 30 Chromebooks with cart and license in the construction trades program, and then 30 Chromebooks with cart and license in 2 of our health sciences, and then 35 Chromebooks with cart and license for the Career Center as a whole. So the total amount would be $56,764.45. And again, this is through the 61A CTE grant.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you. It seems more often than not, when we have something coming before us from the Career Center, we are taking advantage of the 61A grant, and I just would like to underscore how wonderful that is. And we appreciate the people at the Career Center going out of their way to find ways to make use of this money and bring some additional either licensing or tools whatever the students need to improve that Career Center education, but by taking advantage of the grants that are available. So that's fantastic. So please pass that on to the Career Center. I know that they work hard to find ways that we can always keep that to be a really viable and state-of-the-art program.
I'll certainly pass that along.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
Mr. Ichu, with these Chromebooks, I'm assuming that they already have Chromebooks, that these are either adding to or replacing obsolete?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Okay. Thank you,
I
Mr.
request that to be
Etu.
on the agenda for next week
Okay,
for
Thank you.
approval.
thank you. And that
you.
concludes our curriculum committee report.
Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. That
you.
will- Thank you, Mrs. Acosta. That will take us to item 5, Building and Site Committee, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Burton.
Thank you. First item on our agenda this evening is 5A, purchase of Churchill pool bleachers from the 2021 bond. Mr. Francis, good evening.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Our first item here has to do with the summer bond renovations to the high school pool rooms. Churchill specifically is set up a little differently than Stevenson and Franklin. Stevenson and Franklin, if you've been into those pool rooms, they have, if you will, built-in bleachers. We are taking those old wood tops off and changing those out and doing some different things in there. But as far as the bleachers for Churchill, they're the they're not supposed to be mobile. We don't move them around, but they're the kind that you bring in, traditional-looking type grandstands. So we needed to replace the ones that Churchill has in their pool room. The years have not been kind to them, and since we were going in there and redoing different items, that was one of the items that's also being worked on. So I'm bringing to the board, you have the quote in your board packet that is through the TIPS Purchasing Cooperative, and we are looking to bring these bleachers from, and I need to double check my company again, I apologize, but Southern Bleacher Company out of Texas. This is $74,845. This is through the bond. It was always part of what we were going to be doing in the renovations. Just the amount of the bleachers requires board approval. So I bring them to you and recommend them to you, and if you have questions, I'll try to answer them.
Sounds good. Questions or comments from anyone? Mrs. Bradford?
Thank you. When do we anticipate that this will be completed?
So we're working on all the pools through the summer. We have a schedule. We've worked with the athletic directors and principals. So this is all part of that. With regard to timing on this, getting the ball rolling right now is what will help. We're really just in the shop drawing portion.
Okay.
But what we're being told by the manufacturer is that we would have them before the season started. If we had some sort of delay, we are on that edge. It may push it into, and just for people to kind of think about their schedule, it's not September, it's really early August that fall sports begin. So we want to have it buttoned up before that. And that's the aim of the board. If the board approves this next week at the regular voting meeting, according to the manufacturer, we're still on time.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Johnson?
Thank you, Mrs. Burton. Mr. Francis, on the quote, it says, provide one pool bleacher. So that,
It's one item.
it's one item?
Right, yep.
Okay,
Yep.
it just looked funny, it says one.
Yeah.
And you just assume it's multiple
Yeah,
bleachers in
It
there.
is one bleacher. Obviously, it has multiple seats across it,
Right.
benches across it. It is one. We are fortunate that the size works out properly. There's a very specific space right there when you walk into the Churchill pool room. We can't go any higher than this, and going any wider, you would walk into it literally when you come
you
in
walk
those
in the
doors.
doors. Okay.
This actual size is the exact size that would set it. We would have it, the company would install it by, laying it in place.
Okay, thank you.
It says 69 feet long, so that's pretty long.
Yes. Yes, and I believe we went 8 rows. It was pretty
8
much the
rows,
the
yeah.
maximum
69 feet.
we could fit into that space. And it should be about the same size that we have now.
Similar seating capacity.
Yes, similar. It's not the exact same dimensions, but similar.
Other comments or questions? And this is from, these are bond dollars. that we
Correct.
can- okay.
Part of that renovation
Okay.
over the summer from bond dollars.
Terrific, thank you.
I would like that on the voting meeting, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Next item is 5B, technology contractor for the 2024 bond renovations.
I wrote a memo for the board explaining that we had a little bit of a miscommunication going into the study session. One way or another, when working through this, we were under the impression, I was under the impression that this was an actual item that was being bid and brought in. It's actually very similar, it's really a change order, that this very similar conversation that we did have at the study session. From our governance, if we have a change order that reaches $100,000 or more, the notification and discussion with the board of that change order is part of those governance issues that are bylaws that we have adopted for the bond. So from that point, AMCOM, and I tried to lay it out as briefly and least boringly as possible in your memo to just simply explain, very similarly as the conversation we had about the movers, we had pricing from AMCOM that was very good. We consulted our attorney, our bond attorney, and had the conversation saying, are we okay if they hold that price, can we then roll that over into an extension of that contract from 2023 into the 2024? And our attorney said, that's absolutely legit, and if it's to your advantage, that's what we want to do, is to save the taxpayers those dollars if we know that we have very spot-on pricing. AMCOM has been in the district. You've heard AMCOM's name so many dozens of times. They've done a lot of good work in this district through bonds and even other side work. We do want to re-engage them. So looking at the letter that's attached in your packet, that does come from IDS, which is our technology consultant. They put together so really it's basically a menu of pricing for all the different items that we need. So IDS did the work to put together all of the scope that's in the buildings, the 5 buildings this summer, and came up with the dollar amount, as you see, the $240,551.07. And then for some contingency, they're recommending $20,000. So that's where the dollar amount in my memo to you of $260,551.07. It would simply be an extension of the contract and a change order. We would not need, based upon our governance, to come to the board to the voting meeting. So again, I could have just done this at last week's study session, similar to the moving, but because there's a little miscommunication, then the next day we realized, wait, this isn't a whole new bid, it's just a change order.
And Mr. Francis, we don't have to vote on a change order even with this dollar amount on it?
Correct. Under the governance, anything under $100,000, I can sign a change order. Anything that goes $100,000 or more, Mrs. Oquist would sign that. But it's very similar to other change orders we've had. We had one with the ECC. We don't necessarily have to have now. It's for timing pieces. That's why we do notify. It is the board's purview if you would prefer to run through that process, but it's not necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is part of, and definitely we have to stop and think about it each and every time, because we did update our governance procedures last summer. As you know, we had our attorney look through them, and then we went over them with the board, with Plant Moran, Cressa, and so we really do look through each of these. 2 of the reasons are, this is a company that we have been utilizing, so they've already been vetted through that process and approved by the board. We are not changing the pricing that they are charging us, and so we are essentially extending their contract,
Okay.
which we have done successfully throughout the bond with a number of our vendors when they are willing to hold their price. Now, if they were going to up the price and we were concerned that was not a competitive bid, then that would certainly require us to go out to bid. It would be a new vendor, so even at that amount, it would come to the board for approval. But because we have utilized AMCOM, we are essentially extending the timeline of their contract, thereby incurring these dollars and these costs. But they are holding their pricing, so the pricing is not changing, and it is a current vendor that is already approved. So don't ever hesitate to ask. I'm glad you asked, so we had a chance to talk about that again. And at any time, we can walk back into our procedures. We did bring these in the past, especially through the 2013 bond and at the start of the 2021 bond. And it was really in talking with our attorney, and, you know, she was essentially saying that that process is not in line with our governance procedures. However, we do need to notify you. It does need to be at a meeting in public. So all of those things for transparency purposes are there. Part of what this does is it does not require us to go through the timeline of voting through a regular meeting. It allows us to accept this contract and to be able to begin the process of work.
You've essentially approved them once. It's now just an extension of that approval.
Okay, that works.
I'm
Questions
glad
or-
you asked. I think that's really important. We continue to
No, I just wanted to make sure we
revisit that.
understood.
Yes, absolutely.
Comments or questions? Mrs. Frank?
So we are not moving
Correct.
That's okay. Alrighty, that, I believe that wraps up building and site. Thank you very much,
Have a
Mr.
great night.
Francis.
Well, I'll see that.
President
Mrs.
Bradford,
I feel like we
we're
just
done.
did time travel for building and site.
It is, every now and then, once or twice a year, we get a meeting like that.
Well,
take it, we'll take it.
well,
We'll
now
take it
we'll,
on policy, yeah.
exactly, now we're just gonna roll into policy, which we have quite a few items this evening. So item 6, policy 6A, I'm gonna turn it over to Mrs. Frank.
Thank you, Ms. President Bradford.
You're
And
welcome.
I would like to ask for a point of privilege on this. We have several items under the policy committee, and the last two items, item G and item H, are board policy for students, JN, and guidelines for student activities and athletic offerings. Can we move that up to the beginning of the policy committee and go ahead and start with G and H, and then move everybody else down? We're not going to
Yes.
skip anything, we're just going to rearrange the order.
Yes, is everybody good with
Thank you.
that?
Yes.
Okay, yep, we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you, Mrs. Frank.
Perfect, thank you. Mr. Etu, G and H.
Thank you very much, Ms. Frank.
You're welcome.
There is a folder going around right now for each of you. Since there's 3 board policies I'll be speaking on today, they should be in order, with the first one being JN, with both the board policy and the administrator procedure that's attached with it. So board policy JN, and I want to correct myself from, I misspoke last week at our study session in terms of the title of board policy JN. The actual board policy is titled Awards and Scholarships in its current form. And this is revolving around our conversation with letter jackets, letter awards, the process that we do at the district level, the process that we're doing within each of the high schools, and the conversations that have occurred. So this is the one that we're looking to update to now be called letter jackets, letter awards, and scholarships. So we still retain the awards and scholarships, but adding the letter jackets and letter. The first 2 paragraphs there are part of the original board policy under awards and scholarships. We did not talk about these 2 paragraphs at the study session, so I want to make sure that you have your eyes on them this time around. We did go through them. We did not see any need to make any changes to these 2, but please let me know if you see otherwise. Then we went and added in the new language in terms of letter jackets, and it simply reads, letter jackets, also known as varsity jackets, are a means to recognize and celebrate academic, activity, and/or athletic achievements, and awarded to high school students who excelled in these areas. Ms. Frank?
Should that be excel, not excelled?
Excelled.
Because
Awarded
they don't
And awarded to who
get awarded
excelled.
until
Oh,
after the
gotcha.
season, right?
Correct.
After the season.
Who excelled or have excelled? Maybe have excelled, yeah, just who excelled in these areas, who have excelled.
Have excelled?
Have would be good, I
Okay.
think.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, Mrs. Burton.
Along that line, can we just add, in the second half of the sentence, it says, and awarded to high school students, can we say, and are awarded to high school students?
Okay, perfect.
Good there?
Anything else? Yep. letter awards?
Letter awards is a new section as well. We have 2 paragraphs within this one. Students may be awarded letters in academic, activity, and/or athletic achievements. An awarded letter shall be placed on the left front panel of the letter jacket. Each club activity sponsor, club athletics team coach, and Board of Education approved athletic team coach will inform student members of the requirements and standards for earning a letter award in the respective area. Letters given by the school will be awarded to students who have met the established criteria. The method of presenting letter awards will be at the discretion of each school.
You might recall there's a little strike through on the S in that final line, the method of presenting letters, awards.
you.
Oh, yeah.
We did the little strike through. So
Okay.
you read it correctly.
That's
Just wanted to
awesome.
make sure we're,
I'll make sure I correct it on
yeah.
there.
Of each school or each coach? So, because we're gonna streamline the schools, right? So all schools will be
It'll be each school.
the same now, right? Because wasn't there 2 different letters?
The method of presenting, meaning that
Okay.
the school will determine if it's being done at the banquet or if it's being,
Okay.
or whatever it might be.
Okay. Not necessarily the actual letter.
Correct.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Yes, Mrs. Bonnefield, oh, sorry. Mrs. Bonnefield.
Yeah, and I still think we keep getting stuck on it,
Yeah.
because when I was reading it again,
You
so.
went the other way.
Yeah, and then I was like, oh, yeah, the banquet stuff, so that may need to be reworded. Because, again, we are trying to streamline, and then we're going back and saying it's at the discretion of the school, so.
Does anybody not do it at a banquet?
It depends. It has happened before, sure. Especially
Yes.
if a student can't attend the banquet or,
Yes, yes, Mrs. Burton?
Going up to the third line, this is something I don't think we're going,
Are you on?
thank you. Going up to the third line, I don't think this is something we're going to find a good solution to this evening, and we don't have to, but just in the process of going through tonight and our first reading and our second reading to vote on it, I'd like us to readdress the phrase Board of Education approved athletic team. Because it encompasses so much more than the 7 individuals who are on the Board of Education. This encompasses frequently MHSAA approved sports, certainly our athletic council, our district, ultimate approval by the Board of Education. I don't have a good alternative phrase for it tonight. I will work on that. I know I've spoken with you, Mr. Etu, about this, and I know you are also.
yes.
I would just like it just noted that over the next 6 weeks or so before this is hopefully finalized, I'd like to see that title modified.
Mrs. President Burton, you.
Gotcha.
Karen.
I got it. I don't know, I think Board of Education approved, it kind of encompasses, I mean, we're the top tier of that, I mean, we're the ones that have to really say that we're gonna bring on the sport, so I don't know what else you might choose in there. I mean, because we do, I know there's MHSAA, but ultimately, we're the ones that decide whether that sport is gonna become a sport. So I don't have so much of an issue with that Board of Education approved athletic team.
Mrs. Jarvis.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. I think that when it says Board of Education approved, it sounds like that's something that we do, but again, we approve policy, not the day-to-day. And I would suggest that instead of saying Board of Education approved athletic team coach, we say athletic department team coach.
Is there, we do approve that though, because like as we
Yes.
add a sport, it has to be approved by the,
It
like
has
when
to
we
be
added.
budgeted for.
Right, it's part of our budgeting process.
When we approve the budget, that happens, but this makes it sound like it's a standalone
But I
activity.
think there has to be a clarification, as opposed to if you just say athletic team, then you could say, then it begs the question of what's the athletic team? Like if we, it has to be an approved athletic team. It can't just be,
Are
I
there,
don't know, the Frisbee golf team, right? They're an athletic team, but they're
but
not.
are they part of the athletic department?
No, not necessarily.
Right, but it's a board approved. The athletic department comes from the board's approval. Mrs. Acosta,
Well,
can you say that?
yeah, so I was just gonna say 2 things. One, it can't be under the athletic because there are club athletic that
Yeah,
are
yes.
still under student activities director. So that wouldn't
Capture it.
capture all of that. But I think that what I've seen stated is that, I know that it's been defined, and maybe you can show us where, that Board of Education approved, what that means, and I know we read it. So I think there's already a definition of what that means. I don't know if we want to put it in quotations so that, it's a title of something, but it is defined on what that specifically means.
It is. Yep, and I'll share that in a little bit here too.
But I know we're trying to work on wording because it does seem wordy, but I just think in order to, the buck stops here with adding sports, and that you can't just say we're a sport, the board has to approve and budget it, so.
Right.
I can work with the athletic council again and come up with a list of names, and including the one that we currently use, and see where it goes.
Did somebody else? Yes, Mrs.
I just want to add one more thing, and I think this is where the definition, I think, defines what it means to be a board-approved team in the sense of the finances that are tied to that athletic team. But I think what Mrs. Burton is trying to get at is in terms of how do they reach the point of receiving our approval?
Yes,
And those are two distinct things.
yeah, sure, yes, yes, yes. Mr. Johnson?
And I may be reading this wrong, but in that sentence, it almost sounds like when they say, and Board of Education approved athletic team coach, almost sounds like we're approving the coach.
It's something about that wording, yeah.
I thought the same thing.
Something about
And I'm
that
not-
wording.
But I'm not sure how to change that, because I understand what the sentence is
Sure.
trying to do, because it says each club activity sponsor, club athletics team coach, and board, I think what it's supposed to, what it's trying to convey is that the Board of Education approved athletic team
Yes,
coach.
Correct.
yes.
But I'm not sure how to word that so that it doesn't sound like we're approving the coach.
Yeah, yes, Mrs. Costa?
Oh, because I was gonna say rewording, if you move coach, right, the coach of the board athletic.
Yep.
Board of Education approved athletic team.
Could it say something, I'm not a wordsmither, but could it say something like each club activity coach or sponsor, or, something like that? And then start in each sponsor or coach of a club activity, a club athletic team, a Board of Education approved, maybe putting the coach at the beginning, and I know, yes, sir.
What if I flip it around in terms of the end of the sentence becomes the beginning of it? Informing student members of the requirements and standards of earning a letter award in the respective area is the responsibility of the club athletics, the club activity, the club athletics team coach, and/or the Board of Education approved team coach. So
Oh,
it's
that sounds
flipped
better.
around.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
That sounds
I
better.
like that, Kevin.
Yeah, I think that's better.
So read it again.
I don't know if I can.
Sorry.
Sound like it's the coach.
Yeah, I think if you flip,
I'll get there.
flip coach and sponsor to the beginning of that, it is the responsibility of each coach or sponsor of the club activity, what am I saying?
Of the respective team.
I got it.
Club,
Want me to say it again?
Yes.
yes.
Informing student members of the requirements and standards for earning a letter award in the respective area is the responsibility of each club activity sponsor, club athletics team coach, and Board of Education approved athletic team coach.
But you still have that phrase in there,
Still have
Board
that.
of Education
Then
approved.
Then we have to fix
athletic
that part
team
of it.
coach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you bring coach and sponsor, it is the responsibility of the coach or sponsor of club activities, club athletics, Board of Education approved. Mrs. Burton, sorry, you've been waiting quietly, you probably have the answer.
That's okay, I'll give it a shot. It just, if we were, I think there's value in being very clear that it is club activity sponsor. I mean, I think there's value in denoting specifically. It's the club activity sponsor, the club athletics team coach, and the, whatever we call it, Board of Education approved athletic team coach. But I think if we put sponsor of, let me, Kevin, Mr. Etu,
Mhm.
keep your suggestive wording of bringing to the beginning of the sentence, informing student members of the requirements and standards for earning a letter award in the respective area are the responsibility of the sponsor of each club activity, the coach of each club athletics team, and the coach of each Board of Education approved athletic team.
Yes.
Yeah, that's perfect. Good job, Mrs. Burke.
Give it a shot.
Perfect. Anything else on that one? Yes, Mrs. Bonnefield. Oh, no.
It does make it a little bit wordy, but it's at least clear.
It is clear.
It's already worded.
I think I might be able to get rid of the wording, maybe.
Okay?
Tammy, are you on this one or are you on to the next?
I'm on the next sentence.
Okay.
So finish this.
Okay. Mr. Johnson.
Instead of saying, we might just say something like, it's the responsibility of the sponsor or coach of each club activity, club athletic team, or Board of Education approved athletic team.
That's fine too.
And not say coach or sponsor?
You
At the
do it at the
beginning.
beginning. You just say it is the responsibility of the sponsor or coach of each.
And then list
Then
them.
you list the club activity, club athletics team, and the Board of Education approved athletic team.
Yeah.
Then you get rid of the wordy part of it.
Mrs.
Although
Oquist.
Mrs. Oquist may have.
No, I don't have another suggestion. I just want to remind, we haven't gone through this tonight, but the club athletics teams are self-funded. They may indeed have sponsors. I just want to make sure that
Yes.
no one would
Yep.
presume that if they are sponsoring a club
Yes.
athletic team, that they would be making that determination.
Yes.
So I don't think that
Yes.
would happen, but
But it's better to be
sometimes
very
a
specific.
person who provides funding is considered a sponsor of a club athletic team. So it sounds like you want us to work on
Just
the
to be-
clarity of that.
Right.
I totally agree that it right now sounds like the board-approved coach as
And we
opposed
don't want to
the
do
team.
that.
We don't want to do
Don't
that.
want to do that.
And then we are trying to tackle the phrase that you had mentioned earlier. We talked about that today. I don't know that we've gotten there
Yep.
yet, because we do
can work
want
on
to
it.
be certain that we are very clearly delineating each group.
Yes.
But I also understand what you're saying is it's a comprehensive process. It culminates in Board of Education approval.
Right.
But it has come through a very thorough process.
Right.
I almost suggested formal process, but there will be a formal process.
Right.
Or is a formal process for the aforementioned
Right.
activities and
Yeah.
clubs as well. So we'll continue to
We can
work on that.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Yes, Mrs. Bonnefield, next one.
Okay.
Next sentence.
So the next sentence, the method of presenting the letter, can we say something like the method of distributing letters? Or can we say the method of
That's a good idea.
presenting earned letters or distributing earned letters? Just so, because it really, every time we read it, it makes me
I
think.
remember that we
Yeah.
had talked about it last time
It
now.
still
Yeah.
goes back to make me think that we're saying presenting the letters is the criteria for earning
Earning
a
it.
letter.
That's understandable.
Um,
Distributing.
Earned.
or taking out presenting, or presenting earned, or
The
distributing
method of
earned,
distributing.
Yep.
or just distributing, or, I mean, you guys can,
Distributing earned sounds good.
just,
Sorry.
in a
Would
distributing,
we ever
there
put,
can
like,
be another.
for example, i.e. a banquet, just so that they know that that's.
I think distributing really covers it,
No,
but.
yeah, that'll do.
Or some other
Distributing earned,
Distributing's good.
word.
Distributing's good, I think.
or just, yeah, distributing earned, that captures it.
Agreed. That's a great,
Okay.
great solution.
Okay, next paragraph, are you reading that one to us too, or are we reading that one ourselves?
Up to you.
Okay, we can read it ourselves,
Okay.
yes?
Well, actually,
Or no,
out
do we
loud
like
is
to
good.
read it out loud?
Read on.
for the benefit of the public.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, okay, perfect.
So second paragraph, under letter awards, a student athlete on a Board of Education approved athletic team or club athletic team who completes 3 full seasons of athletic experience in a particular sport, but does not qualify for an athletic letter in any of those 3 seasons, will be granted an athletic letter at the end of the 3rd season. The awarding of an athletic letter in this manner is intended to recognize those student athletes who regularly attend practice and participate in team activities, but whose skills and abilities may not earn the athletic letter based solely on the criteria of the coach.
Any thoughts? Hey,
this is current practice right now. This is not something new.
This is current practice,
Thank you.
correct?
But we didn't have it in policy.
Correct.
Okay, I think it's great we're putting it in. Okay, moving on to administrative procedures for JN.
So administrative procedures for JN, letter jackets, letter awards, and scholarships. There was originally a section, and it was the only section in administrative procedures titled varsity letters. It spoke solely to athletic varsity letters. We are looking to remove that completely from administrative procedures and add in 3 new sections: letter jackets, letter awards, and letter awards designs. And this would help guide both my office and the building's athletic departments and beyond in terms of practices there.
Mr. Etu, just before you go on, so both of them include scholarships, but we don't mention anything about scholarships.
I think if you go back to the first paragraph of JN, of the board policy itself, policy of the school district to give appropriate recognition to pupils for progress and or attainment in all areas, classroom, scholastic endeavor, as well in areas of schools, co-curriculum, and extracurricular activities. I think that speaks to what a scholarship is. And that's why it was phrased that way.
Scholarship meaning being a scholar athlete as opposed to like, we're not distributing money.
It could be recognition, and so we may award that based on these pieces. It's a way to recognize students, and we do have a handful of scholarships that are funded by either folks in the community
Private. Yes.
or other groups. And so I think it has generally fallen in there underneath that as another way to recognize students for their progress.
Mrs. Frank,
Thank you. Yes.
while we're on that page, and Mr. Etu, under the date,
That will be updated.
okay, because it says reviewed.
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, sorry, keep going. So students' letter jackets, letter awards, and scholarships again for administrative procedures.
So administrative procedures under A, letter jackets. Number 1, letter jackets are also known as varsity jackets. Number 2, a student awarded an academic, activity, and/or athletics letter award may purchase a letter jacket. 3, a student who is awarded an academic or activity letter will have the words, quote, Livonia Churchill, quote, Livonia Franklin, quote, Livonia Stevenson, written in cursive on the back of the letter jacket as means to represent the school in which the student is enrolled. 4, a student who is awarded an athletics letter will have the words, quote, Churchill Varsity, quote, Franklin Varsity, quote, Stevenson Varsity, written in cursive on the back of the letter jacket as means to represent the school in which the student is enrolled.
Good. Okay. B, letter awards.
Number 1, Livonia Public Schools has 3 types of letter awards that a student may earn and attach to the student's letter jacket. A, academic letter. Awarded to a student who earns a 3.5 or higher grade point average in 4 semesters, and the word academic will be stitched into the letter. B, activity letter. Awarded to a student who meets or exceeds the pre-approved criteria of a school-approved club activity. The word activity, or the official name of the activity, example, robotics or marching band, will be stitched into the letter. C, athletics letter. Awarded to a student athlete who meets or exceeds the pre-approved criteria of a club athletic team and/or requirements set forth in policy JN. The athletic award is left blank with no words stitched into it. And I noticed that something got cut off for athletics letter on mine. I don't know if you did. Just want to make sure we got all of it in there.
Okay.
One is missing.
Yeah, one is missing for that. I'm pulling it up right now.
Just-
Is it missing on yours?
Yes.
Okay,
Mrs. Acosta?
there we go. So back to, oh, I'm sorry, do you want me to keep reading or no? Want me to correct that or no? You
Yeah,
good?
just one quick second. Mrs. Acosta?
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify, and I know we discussed this during our study session, but under letter B, 2, where it says the word activity or the official name of the activity will be stitched into the letter. And we spoke of, I know we are used to seeing robotics or marching band, but that it is, there is the ability for other activities that are approved to have their activity actually listed, the name of that
Correct.
outside of robotics and marching band.
Yep, the official name. We're going to work through those logistics as well.
Okay, thanks.
And then Mr., yes, Mrs. Burton.
On that same point, who's going to decide whether it's going to say activity or the specific name of the activity?
That's
Because I think we need to,
Right, that's conversation we're still having with the student activities director and the principals in
Okay.
terms of that determination, but it has not been decided yet.
And we will definitely add that to this document.
Correct.
To the guidelines document.
okay. So it will
Where-
be in
yes.
writing before this
Yeah,
whole thing
that,
rolls out.
Correct.
The guideline document that we'll go over in a moment definitely goes into a little bit more detail than the admin procedures. So it's relatively unusual that we would have admin procedures and this, but because this is so much more comprehensive, we don't want to lose it.
Right.
And we want to be able to be nimble as we work through some of these changes. But we do think it's important to create the new administrative procedure. So there may be you're going to definitely see overlap, but this document will always give more direction than this one will.
Do you want to read number one, straight to after Mrs. Bonnefield is done?
So going back to B2, or BII, and we can talk about this more when we go into the guidelines where it says who the discretion is, and maybe this is already covered, but I would almost like to say, get rid of the word activity, because the word activity is what has started this whole thing, and just say, if they're in a club, put the name, and I know there's the argument that some kids are in more than one activity and all that kind of stuff, but on the other side of that argument, if robotics decides to do robotics, the kids aren't going to say, well, I want an activity letter, and they're going to get a robotics letter, right? So it depends on what activity they are in and which letter they want to put on their jacket. But and like I said, we can discuss this later, but I would almost like to just not have anything that says, if you're, whatever club you're in, that's what goes on the letter.
Mrs. Acosta?
I was just gonna say, I would like to see maybe a different example, because the community's probably used to seeing robotics or marching band on the letter, so maybe throw a different example of an activity that we don't normally see listed on a letter as an example. Just,
Yeah,
if that,
Yeah.
just to clarify.
yeah. Mrs. Bradford?
Okay, and my only question is, I guess you'll decide who's gonna decide what it's gonna say. Will the whole team have robotics, or will it be up to the individual to say, I want activities or robotics?
That's what we need to decide still.
Oh, gotcha,
Through all
okay.
of that, yeah. There's
Gotcha,
a number of different options and all have pros and cons to
Perfect,
them.
yeah.
So
Well, I
just
mean,
have
some students may want activities because they're in multiple activities, and they don't wanna just plug one on their jacket, so
Right.
I think it would still be important to put activity if somebody would like that.
And we also talked about briefly last week that there are certainly sometimes your patches or pins will also indicate. So if it says activity, you still have the ability to identify that through other means as well.
Okay, perfect.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Just to comment on what Mrs. Acosta said, Churchill doesn't write anything on their letters. So this is new to those students, and they'll be asking questions like that. My concern has to do with students who have multiple activities or multiple sports, or a sport and an activity, and that they letter in how that will be addressed. And I think that if we move away from the generic activity and put on there what the activity was, that we should do that on the sports side as well, instead of having a generic varsity, put down what sport they lettered in.
Just to respond to that, so that exists now. We have kiddos who earn all three, who earn an academic letter, an activities letter, and or an athletic letter. And really, it's up to them to decide which one goes on their jacket. So we have students who end up after their 4 years with multiple letters. So that, just so we know, that does exist now, where they have to make a choice of what is going to be the one that they put on their jacket. But I want to be sure, and I know none of us are doing that, but we've heard some of that feedback. I want to make sure that we're in no way devaluing an activity letter. There is a great deal of pride in earning an academic letter, an activity letter, or an athletic letter. All are considered letter awards. All are able to and do go on varsity jackets. They're able to be worn proudly and represent their school. They're able to add patches and pins. So I just want to be sure that we don't lose the fact that our students who are in these activities are truly very proud of what they've earned, and one is not weighted more than another. So.
And following up on that, just logistically, so if I earned a robotics letter, I earned a marching band letter, and I earned a robotics letter, I earned a academic letter, and I earned a letter for athletics, a board approved. Do I have all of those on my? No, I picked one.
Pick one.
Got it. And then you can put pins on of any.
Or patches.
Pins or patches of any
Or
kind.
medals.
Like I could put my scholar athlete
Mm-hmm.
on, I could do my, okay.
Correct.
I do think that's helpful, but
Did I see a hand? Mrs. Burton? Following up on what Superintendent Opus was saying, I think the folks who are very, very close to this issue are aware of this, but many who may be listening in the public may not be, because it is so very important that each one of these different groups of folks or different paths to earn your letter, there's been an enormous amount of time and effort on the part of every student who will get to the point of earning a letter. And there's been an enormous amount of effort on behalf of the athletic council, the activities departments, the athletic departments, the cabinet, the school administrators, the Board of Education. There's been an enormous amount of effort put into, if this is going to be looked at and basically rewritten, that we do it in a manner that is respectful to every single student in every single path that they go down to earn that letter, because it is so very important to them. So I just want folks in public to understand that this is being taken seriously, not only by this group of people in this meeting tonight, but enormous numbers of hours have been spent over the last couple of months making sure that this is respectful to all of our students for whatever path or paths they earn these really important honors to them.
Absolutely.
yes, sir.
Thank you, Mrs. Frank. Just a couple of points. You know, we talk about getting multiple letters. Let's assume you're a freshman and you get a marching band letter and you're really excited and you put the marching band letter on your jacket. But in your sophomore year, you might get a letter in football. I'm assuming that you can have the letter removed
Correct.
and replaced with
Correct.
a different letter. Okay.
Yes.
We also indicate on the certain jackets, it will be in cursive on the back. But when we talk about academic or activity, we don't specify, at least here, and this may be a point that we want to clarify for continuity purposes, on how those are put on the letter. Is it going to be a cursive? Is it going to be a block?
It's right now, it's typically a block, but we will be sure to outline that.
Okay.
So it says activity in a block letter in the activity letter itself.
Right, again, if we're looking for continuity among all the
Right.
schools, we want to make sure
It'll be the same.
everything is the
Correct.
standard. Okay.
Good point.
Ready to move on? Okay.
Did you need me to reread?
Yeah, just do C1 because it's not on our paper.
I?
Yes, CI.
Yep.
Oh, BI.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry, CI.
Oh, it
yes,
is.
CI. What is CI?
CI. That's what I'm about to read. So under letter awards, C, athletic letters, I, awarded to student athlete who meets or exceeds the pre-approved criteria of a Board of Education approved athletics team with a varsity level designation and/or requirements set forth in board policy JN. Would you like me to continue with II and III? Awarded to a student athlete who meets or exceeds the pre-approved criteria of a club athletic team and/or requirements set forth in board policy JN. The athletic award is left blank with no words stitched into it.
okay. Are we all okay?
Yes.
Keep
No.
going, okay?
Letter award designs.
Yeah,
C,
okay.
yes.
I see.
Okay. Letter awards designs. 1, Livonia Public Schools will have 1 letter award design for each of the high schools, Churchill High School, Franklin High School, and Stevenson High School. 2, Churchill High School will use the Block C design. 3, Franklin High School will use the Block F design. 4, Stevenson High School will use the Block S design. 5, each block letter design must be approved by the school's principal with support by the Director of Secondary Programs.
Mrs. Jerks?
Thank you. Under C, athletics letter, item 3, the athletic award is left blank with no words stitched into it. We mean the letter itself. For the sake of consistency, why do we differ then between the activity letter and the athletics letter? If we write an activity into the letter, why don't we write a sport into the letter and be consistent?
So talking with the athletic council, we have 2 schools, Franklin and Churchill, who currently have a blank letter, and Stevenson High School, who currently has the word varsity in their athletic letter. Through those conversations with the parent reps, the principals, the athletic directors, and myself, for consistency, it was just determined to move to a blank letter across the board at all 3 high schools. So they looked at it from a lens of athletics, having that blank letter with the varsity on the back of the jacket.
They don't want to change the way they're doing it currently, I can understand. However, I'm thinking of consistency between the athletics and the activities because they are equal, because they are both well-earned, deserved letters that recognize student achievement. If one of them is blank, the other should be blank. Or if one has an activity name, a athletic team or robotics or whatever, then it, for the sake of being equal, I would think the sport would be on the letter as well.
Mrs. Bradford?
Well, I question though, in the athletics, if you play more than one sport, you would have to choose the name of your sport.
Same
And
with
you're also
activities.
gonna have your, you're gonna have varsity on the back and you're gonna have your patches and everything for each sport, so.
Mrs. Acosta?
I understand what you're saying in terms of equality, but I think what we're missing is they're governed by 2 different bodies. And that's why their jackets will actually, even if the front was the same, their back will be different.
This was also one way to encompass and recognize both club athletics and, at this point, board-approved athletics. This kind of solved both problems at the same time, so I can live with that.
Because the non-board approved will have activity on it.
No, because
it'll be blank.
either way, if it's a club athletic or a board-approved athletic team under the athletic department, they both have the same letter,
Yes.
Got it, okay, got it.
which is what
That was the
drove
request.
this whole request at the very beginning.
Yes.
And I know that there was a request to see them. You know that we showed you, and we're going to go, actually, Mr. Eju has a very thorough PowerPoint to go through the guidelines, so I don't want to steal his thunder, but because you had asked about seeing the new one, that has not been designed yet, but it will be we anticipate it will be relatively similar to that which is used now, but it will be consistent. As you know, we shared with you, I guess it would be 2 study sessions ago, when we were at LCTC. Part of the presentation was showing you pictures of each school and the different letters that we had for each of these designations. And so one of the things that we had gotten feedback on throughout this process was the idea of creating that consistent block design no matter the award. Because in some cases, as you saw, even the size was different. And so it will be a uniform size. And I know Mr. Eju will share with us that it will take a few years for this to come fully to fruition, because one, we do have many of these still
Yes.
that it would be appropriate to finish up. And it will just take some time over the next few years as each grade level moves up
Yes.
to fully roll over to the new letters.
And our vendors have them stocked because we
Sure.
have approved them in the past, and so I think it's fair to allow the vendors to utilize their stock. But they have, Mr. Johnson.
Back in my day, before electricity, we used to get a pin for the sport that you were in. Football, track, basketball, wrestling, and you were able to pin those on your letter. That was the only thing we could do. We couldn't put medals on. Do they still distribute the pins?
There are pins available, but that's a great question for our athletic directors in terms of each sport and what is available for them to use on their jackets.
Right, and that's what I'm thinking for the multiple sports. You could have the one letter, but you have multiple pins that would designate the different sports that you were in. And that's all we could put on our letters back then.
Mrs. Burton.
If I could suggest also that at the end of this administrative procedure, we have some type of statement along the lines of, for further detail, please see athletic guidelines for student activities and athletic offerings. Because this is probably one of those policies and administrative procedures that a good number of folks in the public may go to look for and may not know to look for the guidelines.
So, I haven't been a real strong advocate of it, but I do agree, I will say out loud, with Mrs. Jarvis, that either all of them should have wording on them or none of them should have wording on them. I think that the same goes with activities and sports, that the kids do multiple things, and there's nothing to say that they don't have a sport letter and an activity letter, 2 different sports, 2 different activities, and their academic letter. We can't necessarily say that we have the sport letters blank because the kids are going to do more than one thing, because probably the kids that are earning letters are earning more than one letter. And Mrs. Acosta, I know you said that the difference is they're by different departments, but if we're including the clubs are not under the same department as the board-approved team sports. And I think the one differentiation, if we want to differentiate, is the kids that are earning the athletic letters have varsity on the back of their jacket. The designation that the kids that are earning the activity letters and or the academic letters have the high school name on the back. So if there's going to be a delineation between athletics and then the activity and academic letters, that designation is already made by saying varsity on the back of the jacket.
Yes, a couple of things, and I keep going. So I just wanted to make sure that we're also clear that there are clubs that are choosing to remain clubs because they want that autonomy. And it's not because it's any less than the athletics varsity, what we deem as varsity athletic, but this is a choice to remain autonomous. So I think that allowing them to maintain that autonomy, but also recognizing the athletic portion of it is why there's that kind of mixed group.
Yeah.
Anything else in that? I do want to mention here, and I think this is so important that we're diving into this and really getting consistency across our district with what this looks like and how student athletes or anybody who's involved in academics or an activity. I think it's so important, but I also want us to keep in mind that we have thousands of students who will never be able to afford a varsity jacket. And so this is affecting a lot of our students, but also we have a lot of students who wish they could have a varsity jacket and who it is really hard for them to even pay the pay-to-play fee or something like that. And so I just want us to remember and put that in perspective, that we have a lot of kiddos who would love to be involved in this conversation, and they're not. And so I just think it's important to keep in mind, this really affects some kids, and this is really important, but there are also some kids who it doesn't affect because they will never be able to afford it because it is a costly investment. And so I'm glad that our district provides it. I'm glad that it's an option for kids, but it also, there are lots of kids who this won't affect. But I still think it's a vital work that we're doing. But I just want us to keep in mind that not everybody who is who's an athlete, who's an academic, or who is involved in an activity will be able to even have a varsity jacket. So, okay, let's move on. Guidelines for high school student club activities. Club activities and Board of Education approved.
It's a
Athletics.
mouthful.
It is hard. Club athletics. That's what I would do.
You do have with you in your folder the Livonia Public Schools guideline for student activities and athletic offerings. Just a bit of a background on this, I can say, historic document. It's about 30 years old that we've been operating with this document. We did a little digging and came up with the fact that our own very own and retired administrator, Mr. Mark Haig, is the one that created this document. So I had the opportunity to sit down with him. It does. I had an opportunity to sit down with him and have a wonderful discussion about this current topic, and he offered some excellent insight as to where this document came from, how it evolved, and he recognizes that it needs to continue to evolve. And he was obviously more than gracious and understood us using this as our template and updating it accordingly. So I just wanted to put that out there. And with that, we're going to go through this guidelines as well as a presentation with PowerPoint for you that will help simplify it in terms of everything as opposed to red marks and black marks and everything else. So, let's see if I can get this working from here. Mrs. O'Brien, are you able to turn the computer around? Oh, is it?
There you go. Oh.
You want to do it? Oh, there we go. Just too far away.
We'll go back.
She's doing it.
Back one more, please. So this is just an update to you, Board of Education, on letter jackets and letter awards. We're going to really dive into each section of this. You can kind of follow along with the hard copy in front of you, but your PowerPoint's going to show kind of bullet points, and I'll expound on each one of those bullet points for us. So overview, back one, please. Overview, background, and recommendations. So as we know, the overview is we do have academic letters, activity letters, and athletic letters. We do have requests from a couple different organizations in terms of moving from an activity letter to a athletic letter. And that allowed us to really reflect on our current practices and talk to each of our schools, both administrative teams, athletic councils, student activity directors, and a litany of stakeholders in our community as to where we are, which turned up some areas in which we can streamline, become more uniformed, and make sure that we're really recognizing all of our students accordingly based on whatever category they may be in, from academic, activity, or athletic, and make sure we're not devaluing any one group as well. So totality from there led us to what you're going to see now. Oh, is it working now?
Just add one quick thing. Could I add one quick thing?
Of course.
So just as also as part of the overview, I think it's important that we just take a moment and acknowledge that there is a reason why this was not a quick process. We have been asked, I'm sure you've been asked in the community, and I certainly understand that if someone is has not delved deep into this, into the background of this, and into the processes we've had in place for several years. We've heard, just give the letter, right? Just give the letter, or just make the change to a different letter. And I certainly understand the passion that comes with that request. What we certainly want to convey is that this has been a really important deep dive into this topic. We are working again with documents and guidelines that are several decades old and that are appropriately being updated. But it's not simple, because one door opens another, opens another, opens another. And I think one of the things we realized in our extended study session last week was how truly complex this question is. And we can't simply make the decision for one group or even two groups. This has to be something where we are leaving a legacy of processes in place whether it's Mr. Etu sitting in that chair, whether it's me sitting in this chair, whether it is you as board member sitting in that chair. In Livonia Public Schools, we do things methodically, thoroughly, and thoughtfully. And I know what you will see this evening, I believe, is really checks so many of the boxes we have been trying to do, but we weren't there at the very beginning. It took time. I want to sincerely acknowledge Mr. Etu. He has met with so many folks, from students to coaches to parents, to community members, to former athletic directors, to current athletic directors and staff. And he has been working on this tirelessly for quite some time. He and I have had many, many meetings and conversations on this. We have had them with you. And I do want to thank you for that. I want to thank the board for your attention to this process, because although it may not affect hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of our students, it is important. It's important to our students, it's important to our parents, and therefore it's important to us. And so it has been a laborious process, and some folks may have wished it moved faster, but I have to say, I think the outcome is much more thorough than what exists, perhaps where students may receive a letter, but it's not with the same processes in place. So thank you, Mr. Etu. I think as we go through it this evening, I hope it makes sense. We do invite the community to reach out to us if you feel that there is a lack of clarity on anything that we're sharing. But we are, again, close to finalized, but we are still have a small word draft in the corner on these, because there are a couple of groups with whom we would still like to meet and garner input. And I believe we've made some tweaks here and there with just about every group with whom we've met. And so we want to finalize that process, but we're just about there. So I'll turn it back over to you, and here we go.
Thank you so much, Ms. Oquist. So as I said, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation. You do have the guidelines in front of you, and you're welcome to peruse that as I'm talking, or pause me at any point in time, of course, if you have questions as we go through it, because it is pretty thorough from there. So just a refresher in terms of our current policy and procedures. We did go through Board Policy JN, awards and scholarships, and looking to update that to letter jackets, letter awards, and scholarships, as well as update the administrative procedures from varsity letters to letter jackets, letter awards, and letter awards designs. And we talked about that just recently in this board meeting here. With letter jackets, all may purchase a letter jacket. If they get an academic letter, activity letter, or athletic letter, they can purchase a letter jacket.
That was currently in place.
And that was currently in place. All may wear patches and pins. I had this conversation for probably the third or fourth time as recent as today with our athletic directors, and they assured us that yes, they can absolutely wear what is awarded to them for their jackets. The back of the letter jacket, as has been talked about a few times, for academic activities says Livonia Churchill, Franklin, or Stevenson, and for athletics says Churchill, Franklin, Stevenson, varsity. And then as we know, we have 3 different awards, and as we absolutely know, with multiple designs, one way or another, with each of the 3 high schools, which we're looking to move forward and uniform that. So that's our current.
Yes. Brent.
Thank you. I do have a question. For the students that are on the unified teams, are they included in this also, or will we be including unified?
We will. Mr. Etu will definitely talk about that as well. Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank
They
you.
absolutely are included.
Thank you.
So our current classifications, we have 2. We have the clubs and activities on one side, and we have athletic offerings on the other side. On the club and activities side, it's a building level approval process through the student activities director and the principal. They receive an activity letter with activity letter award criteria. And clubs, activities, and non-Board of Education approved sports fall under this category right now. On the athletic offerings, this is district and Board of Education approval with the secondary athletic department or secondary athletic director, as well as principal. Goes through the office of the director of secondary programs, in which they can receive an athletic varsity level letter set forth the criteria of each team by the coach. And again, this is a board approved athletic program. Those are our 2 classifications as we know it. What we're looking to do is move to 3 classifications with a club athletics classification. So now we would like to do club activities, club athletics, and as titled right now, Board of Education approved athletics.
There is a 4th academic still remaining, correct?
Yes, yes, Yep.
Yeah, my mic was off. There is a 4th.
Correct.
Which is academic,
correct.
and and that will still remain.
Correct.
Thank you.
So for club activities, the definition of a club activity is curricular and/or non-curricular interests, as well as supplements educational growth and social development of students. That's taken straight from Board Policy JH for student clubs and activities. This comes through building level approval process. The supervisor is a student activities director, and the funds raised go through the LPS activity budget accounts. The general requirements for a club activity is adequate interest. There's a goals and purpose statement, rules and regulation, and there's a qualified sponsor, either a faculty member or approved adult. In each of our schools, student activities director have a packet, a club activity application packet that they fill out. The student fills out with the student activities director. They solidify who a sponsor might be, and sometimes they are a trial activity at first before they become a full-fledged club activity, maybe the next school year. So there is a process already in place to become a club activity at the school level. Good? Some of the administrative requirements for club activities, they provide proposed fundraising activities. This is similar to a club activity that might do a baked goods sale outside the cafeteria during lunch that's approved by the principal and the student activities director. There's an annual program review. There's adequate administrative resources available. There's adequate facility usage when applicable. And there's criteria set forth to earn an activity letter award. Not all club activities are set to earn activity awards. They make that determination going into that application process. A couple of the items to earn an activity letter award is a minimum of 2 years participation in good standing, as well as potentially additional criteria set forth in the rules and regulations of that club. We are having conversations at the student activity level in terms of becoming uniformed there as well. Each school does it a little bit differently, and that's okay. It just depends on the club that they're bringing in, that they may offer at one school but not at the other 2 schools. But for instance, Stevenson High School, they may have students who participate in multiple club activities over their course of 4 years, but maybe not do a certain club 2 years in a row or for 2 years. So they feel that student should earn an activity letter based on the totality of what they did in their 4 years. And they also have a point system set up as well. So each school's a little different, and that's okay. We gotta just look at each one, but we are having conversations that there's areas where we can make it more uniform too.
So, Mr. E2, so you said not everybody earns an You said not everybody earns an activity letter. It would be like Stevenson's Bible Club, right? They're an activity, they meet, but there's no competition, so they would not earn a letter.
I don't want to speak out of turn because I don't know each club
Right,
and where
I'm
they
just-
earn
yeah,
a letter.
right, I don't mean
But
that specific.
there is possibly a club that does not earn a letter.
Right,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, it may
Yeah.
be just something periodic where they may meet
Yeah.
once a week. It's much more casual.
Yes.
It's to learn a skill.
Yes.
Or to enjoy conversation about a book
Yes.
club, in which case it does not necessarily have the pace or the rigor
Right.
of an activity that would earn an activity, a letter
Yes.
award. And they're not doing it for that purpose.
Right. And
Right?
they-
They're doing it because they enjoy it, they want to
Yes.
explore new things. And some of our kiddos change every semester to a different club.
Right.
And so we love that too.
Right.
That, the whole ideas of this is really not about the letter award
Yes.
specifically. It really is about meeting new people and exposure to a new skill or a new idea, or just, a new concept.
Right, and I think that's important, right? We're trying to get consistency across the district, but to say every activity has to have a letter is unfair to groups that just want to explore a new skill. And so I think that's important to say.
Many of them are, in that
yes,
case, are.
that not everybody has to be on that same track. So I think we want uniformity, but people can choose.
Absolutely. So club athletics, the definition we have set here is recognized as a sport, that there is physical skill, that is a district level approval process through the Director of Secondary Programs office. The supervisor for them at the building level will be the assistant principal out of the attendance office. And this is a self-funded organization with district oversight.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Bonner.
So, I did a very quick search and came up with a lot of stuff. So one of the things that we talked about, I asked about last week, would marching band then be a varsity sport since it's physical? The question is, and then we go to varsity, and my research on varsity is that it's participating at a high level. So one of those criteria in some of the stuff I've pulled up is that the sport has a trial process, right? That not everybody makes the team. So I think that might be would be more of a defining principle on this. The second thing is like some of the clubs do not have multiple, freshman varsity, junior varsity, is that some of our sporting clubs then have a point criteria.
Mm-hmm.
They have to meet a time or a certain score in order to letter,
Yes.
to show their athletic prowess in order to get a letter. And one of the defining characteristics I think that is, I feel is very loosely defined is the physical skill. So I said, what is a varsity sport? And it came up with chess is a varsity sport. And it reads, physical demands. It covers all of this stuff. Now, I know we don't have a chess team, or we might not have a chess club that wants a varsity letter or whatever, so this might be a really good kind of in-between thing without calling out anybody in particular. Chess players don't compete based on athletic prowess. Elite chess players need to be in excellent physical shape. Games between top players can last 7 to 9 hours, and even the slightest mistake can lead to defeat or collapse. Competitiveness, the drive to win, is palpable in chess. Skill requirements, sportsmanship, recognized by the International Olympic Team. So one of the criteria is that they're recognized by
Statewide national governing body.
Thank you. Universal appeal. Mind sport, chess challenges the mind, pushing humans to new intellectual feats, and national fervor. There are people who are very excited about chess. Might not care about football, but they'll sit and watch a chess tournament all day. People will watch golf all day, right? I mean, it all depends on what you're into. So with finding this, and there's some other things that are on here, so I think that we're leaving it open to a lot of interpretation. I'm not saying that the chess should be a varsity sport, but I'm saying we have groups that want to be varsity sports, have that varsity on their jacket, and there are arguments for what we would consider a physical skill. There are arguments out there, and we can all, like I said, it didn't take me any time to find this. You Google it, it comes up. And then I had brought up, is marching band going to be a varsity sport? Well, it meets all those criteria. It's physical, it's a competition. Now, what I might say with marching band is there's not a tryout. Everybody can participate. So then does that not meet the criteria for a marching sport? Even though it's a physical skill, is it not, right? Is it everybody gets to participate and there's no tryouts? And how would you determine the point system for those kids who are exceptional at marching band and those kids who are not exceptional at marching band? So I think we're opening up ourselves for a lot of justification of who's gonna get that varsity letter and who is not, and that I don't think that this necessarily is a bright line or a line in the sand of who qualifies and who does not qualify. If we're okay with that, and we're okay with groups continually coming to us and asking to be on the varsity sports, and we're okay if they can feel that they can meet these, that we make them an athletic sport, then that's fine, but
I will say this is just page one. There's a couple more slides
I know,
with more
but, okay,
requirements.
anyway. So,
Mrs. Bradford.
That's fine.
I'm sorry, Tim, were you finished?
No,
Sorry.
I'm done.
Okay.
I just have a comment as far as marching band. I was thinking about marching band, and yes, it's extremely physical. I get that, and they use a lot of athletic prowess marching around. But they do go to competitions, but those aren't their main focus. Their focus is entertainment and coming to groups, and they don't go to weekly matches, for lack of a better term, with other districts. I mean, they get together
But-
once or twice,
No,
but
but
they
they-
don't.
They do.
They do, but they don't do it on a regular basis. So they're basically there for, they help with entertainment, but they're not going around to Novi and every week and having competitions that I'm aware of. Maybe I've
I
missed
would-
that part.
I
I mean, they
would-
do have competitions, I'm not saying they don't, because I know they do, because I was in marching band. I know all about the competitions you go to. But you're not, like, a sport, you're usually weekly scheduled going to events. Band is entertainment, so, but, I mean, you could go on and
You
on.
could argue
I mean,
that
you could
dan-
argue a lot of different things, but I think the point is, you have to, at some point, meet with the director and find out, is this a viable sport for a club athletics? I mean, you could go ahead and, yeah, maybe people will come forward, but we'll have to discern whether or not they're gonna move ahead into a club athletic or not. That's
Mrs.
just my
Jarvis.
opinion.
Just for a point of clarification, until recently, Franklin's marching band was not a football band, it was a 100% competitive band.
Oh, well, I mean, things have changed since I've been out
And
on
I
the
think,
circuit.
Mrs. Acosta.
I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. I don't think that we have loosely identified terms in the sense that there's the process, and that's why we have other governing bodies that determine how these groups are defined in terms of being a sport or whatever the case may be. And that's why there's all that process before it comes to us for approval. And I think that weeds out most of those questions about what falls, what doesn't, are those governing bodies making those determinations before it comes to us.
Yes, right. And I think that's a great point, because I don't think it's for us to determine what the purpose of each, they need to tell us what the purpose of each organization is. And I'm so thankful that we're not making that decision of what their purpose is. And I think to be able to allow the governing bodies to do their job, and that's why we're giving direction, but they also have, like you said, this huge packet that they get whenever they apply for things to figure out where they want to be. But I think let's let you finish your whole presentation,
Yep.
and then we'll keep
Absolutely.
going from there.
Yes.
It's really good information, Mr. Etu.
So continue with club athletics. Some of the general requirements, they are a previously approved club activity. They can't just come in as a club athletic program. So if you want to talk about figure skating and girls hockey, because those are two that have come forward, they are club activities for us at either Stevenson High School for figure skating or at the district level for girls hockey. They've established themselves as a club activity. They would have the opportunity to apply for club athletics.
And one of the reasons that we thought that was important was to jump to a club athletic status if you've never done that before. We really have no idea what the sustainable interest is, the interscholastic opponents and the opportunities for that. And so it really, as you've talked about trial periods even for clubs, being a club activity would first give that team an opportunity to determine if there is sufficient interest over a period of time, and whether or not that has been demonstrated.
Second on that list for general requirements is may not be an already Board of Education approved athletic program. So there's a couple of reasons for this one. One of them is from, if you take a board-approved athletic program that has tryouts, varsity level tryouts, and those individuals, those student athletes are cut from that team, they would not be able to go and then create a club athletics program to try to earn an athletics letter. That would not be the highest level of competition within that sport. The varsity level of the board-approved athletic program would be the highest level of competition in that sport. Anything about that there? You good? Okay. Also have consistent growth and stability, adequate interscholastic opponents, and sanctioned under statewide or national governing body. Those 3 bullet points are also tied within our Board of Education approved athletics, but the Board of Education approved athletics gets more detailed with those 3 bullet points. Continuing on, they must abide by Livonia Public Schools Athletic Code of Conduct. Example being, if a student unfortunately gets in trouble for vaping in the bathroom, athletically, they would lose 50% of their season for a board-approved athletic program under the athletic director in the athletic department. The same will hold true for a club athletic program. And that's something that I would have that conversation with that club sponsor and that organization regarding that. If you want to be a club athletic sport for LPS, we're abiding by our LPS athletic code of conduct as well as our district and student code of conduct. Continuing that, they would have goals and a purpose statement, rules and regulations, and a qualified sponsor as approved by the Director of Secondary Programs. Pause there, are we good?
Hold on. Mrs. Burton?
I suggest that we add to qualified sponsor as, add what you just said with, as approved by the Director of Secondary Programs.
I can add it to this. It is within our document here as well,
Okay.
but I can add
Okay.
it to the PowerPoint too.
No, PowerPoint is, no,
Okay.
not important, as long as it's in the
In the
document.
document, yes.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Mr. Yutu, when you say qualified sponsor, are you talking about a financial sponsor or
Question.
somebody who will act as in a leadership role?
Leadership role. Yep. Good question. I can bring clarification to that in the document itself. Mhm.
And there will be a very thorough process for teams requesting this status that will include the next items in the next slide. But there will be a very clear process and a detailed process that a group would have to go through in order to achieve this status, similarly to that of other processes. As you know, I think it was almost a 1.5-year process when we did the last board-approved athletic varsity sports of lacrosse and bowling. It was not a quick process. It was not a couple of months. It was well over 1 year to 1.5 years to go through that full process. We don't expect this will be that long, especially for established groups, but I'm just saying there will be a process to go through, and that will go through Mr. Etu's office.
Good. So administrative requirements, there will be an annual program review with the club sponsor, with the Director of Secondary Programs. Now, for the last 3 bullet points, this is for the assistant principal, the attendance office of each of the high schools. They will report back to the club sponsor a 5-week eligibility and semester grade check reports. This currently happens under the athletic department. Every 5 weeks, the ADs do grade checks on their student athletes, report to the coaches and the student athletes who might be right in that line or below that line and what needs to occur. The attendance office assistant principal will do the same thing for our club athletic programs. So that'll be the point person for them. They also will be, the attendance office assistant principal will be in charge of violations of the athletic code of conduct by a student athlete and violations of the district and or school code of conduct by a student athlete. For that,
Mr. Etu, can
Yep.
you just explain the totality of, under the first bullet point, is that TBA, to be announced?
the D got left off there,
Okay.
so to be determined.
Okay, okay.
I will correct that for sure.
No.
Good?
Yeah, I thought TB was,
Something special.
yeah, yes, exactly.
The athletic letter award, you're enrolled in Livonia Public Schools. Number 2, the meet the criteria set forth by the club sponsor and approved by the Director of Secondary Programs. This is something where the Director of Secondary Programs would work closely with the club sponsor. That club sponsor would present to that office what criteria they feel meets the level of a varsity team in earning an athletic letter currently in that particular sport. And the Director of Secondary Programs is the one that would approve that or not approve it. With that being said, the third bullet point is essential. Compete on the equivalent of a varsity level team as approved by the Director of Secondary Programs. The club sponsor needs to sit with me or whoever's in the office and say, this is the highest level we have, and here's why it equates to a varsity level program that you recognize within your board approved athletic programs. And if we approve that, we are essentially saying that is a varsity level program, hence why they can achieve that athletic letter at the varsity level. And then the 3 full seasons rule, which we've talked about a few times.
Random thought, because I have injured kids. If you are injured for one of the seasons, but you're still, I don't even know how to. word it,
Actively
but-
participating as much as possible.
We honestly leave it at the building level.
Okay.
And the club sponsor level. You know, I'm not part of the day-to-day operations of that particular student, so I'll lean on that coach and that club sponsor and that athletic director to make that decision if they get a letter or not. Good here? So we move into the Board of Education approved athletics. A lot of this is already adapted, we've been using for years, but it's recognized as a sport, physical skill. There are varsity and/or sub-varsity levels, and it's a district level and Board of Education approval process. Reports through the Director of Secondary Programs. The supervisor for board approved athletics is our athletic director, and funds raised go through LPS athletic budget accounts.
Clarification. Mrs. Burton?
I think it's important to note for the benefit of the public that I think it's significant that some of the club athletic teams that are coming forward asking for varsity recognition have specifically asked that they keep their funding sources and their funding oversight autonomous. They do not want their funding to go through Livonia Public Schools. They want, for example, the ability to raise more money and to choose how to spend that to go, for example, go out of state for tournaments, which is something that we would not normally do for our athletic teams. So there is an important financial difference that's not at the request necessarily of Livonia Public Schools, but rather at the request of the teams that are coming in asking for a varsity letter. So I think that's an important distinction for folks in the public to know about is those financing streams are very different for club activities. Those fundraisers and expenditures of funds go through Livonia Public Schools. They would not be going through Livonia Public Schools for club athletics, as I understand it. Is that correct?
It is correct to a certain extent. We need to have conversation in terms of some oversight at the district level with some funds that come in, because some of those club athletics would do probably fundraising at some regard or another, where we may want oversight of those funds and how they're being spent.
Okay,
So that's additional conversation has to happen.
okay, that's being worked on then?
Mhm.
Okay, all right.
I think there is a significant difference in that one is district-funded and one is self-funded. That's the primary difference,
Okay,
yes.
all right.
So the general requirements, there are 2 in terms of how to become a Board of Education approved athletics. One is is a sponsored MHSAA sport, or they meet all of the following requirements. Adequate interest for the 4 preceding years. Adequate interest defined as double the minimum squad size. There's also a minimum of 10 interscholastic opponents, and it's sanctioned by a nonprofit statewide governing body. Additional requirements: abide by the Livonia Public Schools Athletic Code of Conduct, abide by district and school code of conduct, sufficient and sustainable district funding, and available facilities. Good. Administrative requirements include all athletic offerings will be reviewed annually to determine the continued compliance and other standards established by Livonia Public Schools. The athletic letter award, you're enrolled in LPS. You meet the criteria set forth by the head varsity coach and athletic director. You compete on the varsity level team, and again, the 3 full seasons rule.
Any questions?
No.
Okay.
Transitioning to what the original topic is of letter jackets and letter awards. our recommendations include the following. Letter jackets will be also known as varsity jackets. They're available to students who earn that academic activity and/or athletic letter.
I don't think
The
you-
next
I didn't go through it, I'm sorry. There we go. Again, letter jackets, also known as varsity jackets. They're available to students who earn an academic activity and/or athletic letter. Again, with Livonia Churchill, Franklin, Stevenson on the back of the jacket for academic and activity letters. Churchill, Franklin, Stevenson varsity on the back of the jacket for athletic letters. Letter awards, the three types again, academic, activity, and athletic. Academic is stitched into the academic letter. Activity, or the official name of the club activity, stitched into the activity letter. Athletic letter is blank, and we'll have one block letter design for each high school. And there it is. Questions?
Yes, I see. Yes, Mrs. Bonner.
So, going back to the finances, obviously, if it's Board of Education, sport, that obviously is part of the district budget that runs through the district. So now, clubs, different clubs, non-letter earning clubs, if they have fundraisers, and they have expenses or they do different things, if it's an official school club but doesn't earn a letter, are their funds required to go through a district account?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so, but we're saying that the athletic clubs are clubs, as they stand now, they're clubs, but we don't require their funding to go through the district?
They would be a self-funded organization, meaning that we're not providing them funding to support their program.
I get that, but we're saying that clubs, like the chess club or the book club or something, if they do fundraisers, their funds have to run through a district
Our
account.
activity accounts.
Our activity, but we have clubs that are sports clubs that are self-funded, which would be clubs that do fundraisers, right? Then their money does not have to go through a district account.
Currently, some do and one does not.
Okay, so.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Would that then, in order to be, I guess I'm wondering why the club athletics are singled out and do not have to meet the same standards as the other clubs in relation to funding. Now, I know for PTA, right, we had our own accounts, but we were also we all had our own EIN, we all filed 990s, all of our information was public information, and so for the PTA accounts, we had our own accounts, we did not run through the district. So my question would be, if these self-funded clubs are not running their funds through the district, then do they have their own EIN numbers, and are they filing nonprofit 990s or 990Ns, whatever they would need to do? Or do they just have a bank account and they're just running their funds back and forth?
So I think that's a great question, and we'd ask the board for just a bit more time on that item.
Okay.
We're really in the process now of establishing first that there would be another tier, what the criteria will be. I think we've made a lot of progress, and that is one area that Mr. Etu and I have talked about some of those same questions. And even though it is self-funded, what is our responsibility with regard to, if currently some do, one does not. And so we really need to think through what is the most appropriate process, even with a self-funded group, to have some level of district oversight, if it is truly formally acknowledged as in this way. And so we really haven't made that determination. We do want to talk to folks a little bit more. We want to include our Chief Financial Officer, Mrs. Smith, in that conversation. We really want to talk through, a lot of that is related to being certain that what our responsibility is as a district and as a fiscal agent in this, with regard to our connection to this. So I think that's what we're still needing to work through. And so if you'll give us a little bit of time on that one, we should be able to come forward with more information next month.
Okay.
Mr. B2, just a quick question. Just a couple different times it said there are 3 levels, and so I think just as Mrs. Burton said earlier, either 3 or 4, right? Because
Right.
3
I think the mindset is we're working off activities and athletics, and we're branching those two
Yes.
to a third one in club athletics.
Yes.
But if we prefer for clarity, just to include all 4 and add academics back in, that's simple enough.
that would just,
Yep.
because
Yeah, I think
again,
that
it's
would
like
be
3,
helpful.
Yep.
so I just.
Sure.
There's 4, just for clarity, as we, just different places, if it says, is that confusing to say 4?
No, I agree.
And I think to just come back around to unified, which is different than united. So we have groups that are combined across schools. So we have a united team in gymnastics, we have a united team in lacrosse, we have a united team in hockey between Churchill and Franklin. And so those would be considered united teams. Those fall under board-approved athletics, and nothing is changing with regard to those. We do have many of our students, and we are so proud to have a growing unified athletics program involving our students with special needs and their peers, their general education peers, who come together for sports such as cheerleading, basketball, bocce ball, and that has just continued to grow with, quite frankly, with great pride throughout our district. I know many of you, if not all, have attended some of those events, and they truly are a very special part of our students' activities. And we have chosen to continue to support offering a varsity athletic letter for their participation. So we realize they may not currently check all of the boxes in the same way. We feel that that is appropriate, that is what is currently happening, and we would recommend that that continue to happen.
Okay. Any other questions, Mrs. Burton?
Where will this Livonia Public Schools guideline be housed? And will it be available on our website under athletics or somewhere where our
It would be
Parents and
under
students.
the director of, it would be under the secondary programs highlight. So we will do what you recommended, which is we will reference it at the end of
administrative procedures?
Administrative procedures, JN.
Okay.
And we will reference, and we can certainly link that as well, but we will reference where people can find these
Okay.
more extended guidelines.
Okay.
Yeah.
Either that or under the athletics page, but wherever you find it's appropriate. I mean, that's not a
Sure.
board decision, but as long as it's clear
Sure.
where parents and students can find that.
Yes. And it may
Thank
be
you.
under activities and athletics and secondary,
They're right,
because it really
yeah, because it'll
covers
be, yeah,
all of them.
yeah, you're right, it
So-
will be in auto.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion.
Thank you.
Anything else, any other questions? No. Thank you, Mr. Etu.
Thank you,
Mrs. Oquist,
everybody.
your whole staff and team, yes.
Sorry, one quick question. This will be on the regular agenda next week, or are we still, no, we're still in the working stages. So
Drafting.
this will be moved on to the next study
Yeah,
session?
we're hopeful for May. We're certainly getting there. I think we want to have a bow tied on all of this. But Mr. Etu will remain in communication with the folks that have come forward, particularly from a few of our current club activities and sports, and be certain that they're updated on this. We do not want to delay the process. We just want to be sure we have all of the elements in place. And so we anticipate bringing the actual board policy administrative procedures, the board policy, to the May voting meeting, but we will revisit it briefly at the May Committee of the Whole in case there are any changes, and we will work on the clunkiness
Terminology.
of the board-approved athletic.
Well, I just want to say thank you on behalf of our board. I can't believe the amount of progress that has been already made in this area, because it included policies, new procedures, and all new guidelines. And I thought putting that category, extra category in with, under the activities with club athletics was, wow, what a great thought process that was. So really appreciate all your work, Mr. E2, and all the crew who's worked on
Everybody.
this, and all the other groups that have been included, because it, like Mrs. Oquist said, this is not just simply handing out a letter. There was a lot more to it, and we want to get it right. So we want to get everything done the right way. So thank you so much.
No,
for
thank
all
you.
your work.
Appreciate the feedback.
In the midst of all your other responsibilities of running our secondary schools, which are very extensive. So thank you for doing both. I mean, just the amount of red, right, the amount that you've created and changed has been impressive, and in a very short, within a perspective, within a very short amount of time. And so while continuing to run our secondary schools has been very impressive. So thank you for your diligence on
Thank
this.
you.
Okay, now back to A, board policy, business management. Mr. E2, wellness for students.
You have in your folder, Board Policy EEB, Business Management, Wellness for Students. This is one that was looked at back in December of 2016. It goes along with some federal requirements, and we looked in terms of updating this policy moving forward. It is something in terms of where there is a wellness committee tied to this Wellness for Students board policy, and we'll be working on that this spring as well, but we'll go through that as I walk through this. As you can see, for the policy itself, there isn't much to change. It is accurate and current with what current law is. A couple strike-throughs in terms of that first paragraph of Livonia Public Schools school, and then we changed found to identified about halfway down there. And that is about it for the board policy itself.
And Mr. E2, we talked about this in the study session, and you mentioned it too. This is a lot of law. We can't change it. There are some
Correct.
things that a little bit feel maybe, just that we can't control it from midnight or, the timing. It is all law. So this is not something that we are free to change or free to make more reasonable. This is law.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Frank?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mrs. Goodman.
Under nutrition standards, I'm not sure if I'm looking at the most current one or if we changed this last meeting or not. Identify, to me, looks like it should be identified. Oh, has it been changed? Okay, then I'm sorry, my
Computer screen?
my computer died out partway through the meeting, then redid itself.
Good to go.
Never mind. I've got one, thanks, but it just,
Yeah.
it went to sleep too long and then it just stopped.
So the board policy does have a district wellness committee, nutrition education, nutrition standards, fundraising, physical education and physical activity opportunities, other school-based activities designed to promote student wellness, and implementation and measurement. And we're not looking to change any of that language, just a couple of tweaks that you saw in there.
Any questions, comments, concerns with that? With the policy, the actual policy? Okay.
Administrative procedure takes each section of the board policy and stretches it out a little bit. In the district wellness preamble, we're looking to make it an uppercase D for district. We removed the second paragraph. In the third paragraph, we are looking to strike out while minimizing commercial distractions. For number one towards the bottom, the last sentence of 1A, we added the director of secondary programs will have oversight of this committee.
Yeah.
Number three, nutrition standards, we added the word "the" in front of district. For 3C, we crossed off Board of Education and added in district. For the second paragraph on the next page, we crossed off the word board, added the word district. And then for consistency purposes, we changed the word fundraising 3 different times to say altogether fundraising, fundraising, or fundraisers. At the bottom of that page, so under number 5, physical education and physical activity opportunities, so 5A1, recess elementary, we crossed off recess monitors will encourage students to be active. For number 2, we crossed off offer, but added notify families of. And we also crossed off or both through a variety of methods. Next page, under number 6A, we crossed off promote while adding provide information.
That's good.
And added the word and before families, and crossed off in the general community.
I made a couple different, I think added something there.
Okay. Didn't make it on it? Okay.
So I'm going to suggest, we had some conversation about notifying the general community. And
Yes.
so we talked about the feasibility of that. Certainly the intent under community health promotion and engagement is that where possible, we do that. And so my suggestion would be that the sentence would read, the district will provide information to parents, guardians, families, and where feasible and appropriate, comma, the general community, the benefits of, and blah, 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 blah. So there may be a situation in the dialogue, or at a board meeting, or on our website, where it may be both feasible and appropriate to share the benefits of healthy living, healthy eating, and physical activity. We may have a walk to school day, and so that gets promoted through our social media. And so I would suggest that rather than simply crossing that out, we just put where feasible and appropriate, the general community.
And if I can say real quick, the hard copy doesn't reflect that, but the board book does.
Yeah, yeah, it's in there, yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Jarvis.
In that paragraph, in front of the word "the benefits," there should be either about or regarding. When we had promote, we were promoting the benefits, but now that we're providing information, we're providing information about it or regarding it.
Regarding, is that what we're going with?
The district will provide information when feasible and appropriate.
Regarding the benefits of.
No, provide information to parents, guardians, and families, and when appropriate and feasible, the general community.
Yes, and then.
That does need,
The benefits.
The benefits and approaches.
there needs an and, or there needs something.
I like about, you started with about.
About or regarding.
I think about makes sense, about the benefits and approaches, et cetera. Because once we changed it, that would not make sense without it.
But Andre, in there, it just says, families when feasible and appropriate the general public. Shouldn't it say and the general public, and, do you know what I'm saying? If you're listening to provide information to the parents, families, when feasible and appropriate the general community,
I thought she said families and where feasible and appropriate.
I think it just needs that and in there.
Okay, got it.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else? No? Okay.
Towards the bottom in 7C, crossed off Board of Education and added superintendent. And that is the last of that.
That was a really nice way to handle that general public piece and the promoting piece. I think that was a really
I like
nice landing spot. Any other questions on the wellness? And that will go for a first reading.
Please.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Are you taking a break? No, I lied. I see Mr. Green is coming up. I thought you were taking a break. Okay, B, bullying prevention, JCEC, Mr. Etu and Mr. Green. Thanks for joining us.
All right, we are jumping into JCEC, Students Bullying Prevention. This is something that we work diligently with our Bullying Prevention Task Force for the better part of 6 months. They've met about 4 or 5 times and will continue to meet if necessary as we roll this out from that standpoint. But we looked closely at our bullying prevention policy as well as administrative procedures, and we'll go through that as it reads right now. So for the bullying prevention policy, we are looking to, in red there in the first paragraph, and social-emotional standards. In the second paragraph, we are crossing off the word control and changing it to authority. In the third paragraph, very first word, we're adding this before policy. We then are looking to strike through definitions that are redundant within the policy itself. So I'm moving into page 2 now. The first full paragraph of page 2 that begins bullying includes a person willfully. We are striking out and repeatedly. We strike out repeated again in the second sentence. And then we strike out, or second line, I should say, and we should strike out that is reasonably perceived as being motivated either by. And we start a new sentence called bullying may be related, but not limited to.
Great, I think that's great.
And I think that's actually going to be a new paragraph.
Correct, that will be,
Just to, I think what I recall the board wanting to do was
That's page 1.
emphasize that first sentence.
Yes.
And so that next sentence would be actually a new paragraph.
Perfect.
So we're doing, this is going to be changed to "and," not
Yes.
"any."
Yeah, a strike through on that Y.
Okay. Yes, Mrs. Acosta.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I know we spoke about this at the study session, but I know that it's a general belief that that definition of bullying requires the repeated behavior, and I know that's what we're striking out. Can you just go over?
of course, of course. We did have repeated behavior as part of bullying policy when this was first implemented. When the task force reviewed state law, state guidelines on bullying, at no point in that document does it use the word repeated. In fact, it talks about it can happen one time. And so we felt it was important to remove repeated, which is something that we will have to re-educate our building administrators in terms of that definition and what it means to be bullied and how to work through that process beyond being a repeated offense. It can be a sole incident that occurs.
Thank you.
Anything else? Mrs. Burton?
Thank you for the change in how you reworded that sentence. That got exactly to my point of the fact that frequently it is related to one of those defining characteristics or groups, but there are times when it is absolutely not. It appears to be random, but it is absolutely bullying going on. And I think that your rephrasing of that took care of that need perfectly. So thank you very much for your efforts on that.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
So when we say related to actual or perceived characteristics, I guess one of the issues that we're having right now is that with gender identification, and sometimes, and maybe this is too mainstream media, but you know, we talk about people feeling bullying because someone doesn't use the right pronoun and things like that, which is a perceived bullying if it's consistent. So how does that kind of stuff fit into here if we're talking about a perceived characteristic in the bullying, or is that not part of this discussion?
I think that really started more focused on the area of mental, physical or sensory disability or impairment. The perceived, I think, was initially in regard to those.
Okay.
Because there may not be an actual impairment. It may be perceived by the person doing the bullying that that person may have some type of impairment. It could certainly apply to these others, but when that was initially discussed is if we just put actual and not perceived, a person may or may not know that, but may be making an assumption that's inaccurate. Does that make sense?
Mrs. Oquist?
Yeah.
I thought one of the things that you said, we had such a long discussion about this during the study session, but I think even speaking to that point, I think one of the things that you talked about, the peer-to-peer conflict, the difference between bullying and peer-to-peer conflict, I think that was really, really helpful. And maybe this is a piece where it's just conflict and not necessarily bullying. Could you just speak a little bit to the difference of the
Age
two?
appropriate.
Or
Sure. And certainly Mr. Green and Mr. Etu can as well, but one of the things when this was first required through Matt Epling Safe School Law, we really worked to try to help students understand, help staff understand, and help parents understand that not all mean behavior is bullying. And I think most folks realize that, but that was a learning curve for us all, because at that time, a lot of focus was on the word bullying, when there was mean behavior or taunting behavior between two people, or even physical aggression, and it was referred to as bullying. And so we really began to call that either normal peer conflict or age appropriate or age typical peer conflict in one column and bullying in another. It does not mean that it won't be addressed, that it may not be hurtful. Normal peer conflict may be mean-spirited and require consequences. And it also may not fall under the category of bullying. And so we really wanted to help students, parents, and staff be able to utilize the words to help people understand what bullying is and what it isn't. And all of that behavior will be addressed, but specific to bullying prevention, that is part of the training materials for all of those groups, is identifying what is age-typical peer conflict and what is bullying.
I think that was really helpful that we talked about in the study session. Any other questions, comments right now, or should we have him continue?
I want to make sure, I feel like perhaps we didn't answer
No.
Mrs. Bonifield's question, so I want to make sure we
I think
do.
some of it's kind of filled in, and I think there's a lot to it. And I think a lot of this, right, is that we read this as a policy and think that it's very black and white, where we take this on a case-by-case basis, correct? And it depends on the intent and how often it's been done. There's a lot of factors. And so I think when we're reading this, I am putting specific instances in my head and then trying to resolve those where it's not that simple. It really matters on the circumstances and knowing that individual circumstance, and really knowing that this is not about checking boxes or rubrics or something like that. And I think in my head, I'm going to specific scenarios where there's no underlying, I have a specific scenario in mind, but it doesn't have any other underlying circumstances that would help me to decide whether or not it was a case of bullying or not. So I'm good.
Okay.
Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. I think it's also important to note that even though we have specific behaviors and lists of different types of bullying, there's no way we can include all of them. So I'm glad it says not limited to. I also think it's important to recognize that a lot of parents classify many behaviors as bullying, and they're not necessarily things that the district would call bullying. I remember that we were at one meeting, I think it was at the Career Center, where we were presented with a list of behaviors. There were 80 behaviors on there that are all identified and need to be addressed as misbehaviors. Only 2 of them were bullying. 80 behaviors and only 2 were bullying. So, we need to first define bullying, and I think this goes a long way towards doing that. But we need to also respect that there are other behaviors that are negative and that need to be addressed and need to have consequences, but are not under that bullying category.
Good? Okay. I'll continue at the bottom of that paragraph where we cross off bullying can be physical, verbal, psychological, written, or a combination of all 4. And we move into examples of bullying may include, but are not limited to. We added E, cyberbullying. Next paragraph, we crossed off teacher or counselor and added staff member, as well as building was added before administrator. 2 paragraphs down, second from last, we crossed off verified and changed it to reported, and we did the same thing in the last paragraph.
Too, I just think, going back into that, examples of bullying may include but are not limited to, it's a both and, right? There are some things that are age appropriate, but I think we had too narrow of a scope of what bullying was. And so I'm glad that we're looking at it and it doesn't have to be repeated. And some of those 80 things are maybe being recalculated or looked at into, maybe this is bullying. And so I think it is a both and. There's some things that are age appropriate, but there are some things that maybe we had too narrow of a scope of what bullying is. So I'm thankful that you were looking into it and educating, right? We continuously grow, and we're continuously getting better and learning and growing, so.
I just wanted to come back to telecommunications we had talked about.
Yes.
We, I will say personally, I could not come up with one single word. I mean, it really refers to electronic, digital, or mobile devices, but that would become cumbersome because we repeat that, I think we utilize it 4 to 5 times in that one paragraph. So are you okay with keeping telecommunications? It was back on the first page. We talked about it. We said we would take a look at it. I think it does cover, unless we want to, after the first mention of telecommunications, in parentheses, put the parenthetical phrase electronic, digital, or mobile devices. And then therefore I know telecommunications is a bit of a dated word, and if you look up the formal definition, it is a bit dated, but it saves us from repeating video over video game networks and
Yes.
cell phones and computers and so on.
Mrs. Bradford?
I think that would be a great idea to put that in parentheses after the word device, just.
Electronic.
Yeah, electronic, yeah, it'd be
Digital or
after,
mobile.
Yes.
it'd be after telecommunications access device, right? And what would you say, digital, mobile, or
Electronic, digital, or mobile device.
device? Yeah, I think that's great.
And in like 2 years, they're gonna say, I can't believe they didn't include.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, no doubt about it.
Yes, whatever the new
No
thing
doubt
is.
about it.
Yes, yes.
And-
Okay.
And just for the record, that the telecommunications word comes directly from the Matt Epling school
Okay.
safe law.
Okay.
That's the word that's actually used,
Okay,
so.
thank you. Yes, exactly.
And it's, oh, Mrs. Burton, part of, as we were going through and revising this, as you mentioned, so does state law. And that's part of the, our general understanding, expanded usage of the word or lack thereof, and state law. All these things evolve. And as they evolve, that's why we continually look at policy like this one.
Mrs. Bonnefield?
So I know we've talked a lot about this, is not only writing this policy and having it in writing and clarifying, but a big portion of this too is the training that our teachers the teachers and administration are gonna get is going to be improved. We have always done the training. We do that, but we're talking about improving that training, correct? To update that training.
Yep, reevaluating what we're currently doing and enhancing it where needed.
Okay, and then, I guess, I think sometimes, and we just talked about this, is what is the definition of bullying and where does that cross over? And I know there's 2 sides to every story and it's the answer's somewhere in the middle, but oftentimes we have parents come to us and say, my administrator wouldn't do anything, or they just simply told me it wasn't bullying. And of course, parents are very emotional about this, so we don't necessarily get 100% of, what was said or done. But just really clarifying, I think, with the staff at the beginning of the year that it's important if parents come in, being able to talk to them really clearly and explaining, if it doesn't reach the level of bullying or what the consequences are gonna be, that they really have, they're prepared for the communication to try and explain in detail, rather than a parent feeling like they've been dismissed. And I know that's not the intent of our administrators, but I think if all of, the building principals or assistant principals all have that same ability to approach parents and discuss with them fully you know, what what level it's reached, that has been reached, and then what the consequences are, and that it's really clear just because it's not bullying doesn't mean that there aren't going to be any consequences for those actions.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that is really important to, when they're talking about that, is that just because it's not a public consequence doesn't mean that the perpetrators or the children that are involved aren't getting consequences. And make it really clear that we don't publicly punish, right? And that just because they don't necessarily, and I know I'm not wording it right, but just necessarily because they don't see that the other children are being punished, or that, you know, they haven't been expelled from school or something like that, does not mean that they are not getting an appropriate consequence.
With a focus on restorative practice as well.
Which is great,
Yes.
because then they do know that some, you know, actions have been taken because both parties are involved.
Right. Right.
Okay. Any other questions?
Moving on to administrative procedures, are we going to go over this? And these are all new,
The
correct?
administrative procedures are brand new.
Okay.
Yep. Would you like me to read it into the record, or how would you like me to move forward? You want to read it to yourselves or read it into the record, whatever you
I
prefer?
think administrative procedures don't need to be read into the record because they're not the responsibility of the board. I think this is just more for our information. Do you want to take some time to read it, or do you want to read it on our own for the sake of brevity and then come
I
back
can
to
give a
it
brief
next
overview.
week?
I
Okay,
think it would
yeah,
be important for the
yeah.
community if.
A brief overview
Mr.
would be
Dugan
great.
can just give an overview of what's included.
Yes,
That
yes,
would be helpful.
So the task force put together administrative procedures to provide additional guidelines and practices for at the building level and at the district level. I am going to read number 1 just to kind of get us rolling here, but at the conclusion of each school year, building administrators and support staff will conduct school building level, early childhood, lower elementary, upper elementary, middle school, high school, and/or post-secondary transition meetings. The purpose of these transition meetings is to ensure building administration and staff at the next school building level are informed of substantiated and/or unsubstantiated bullying concerns that occurred at a student or student's previous school building. So again, at the end of the year, early childhood will touch base with lower elementary, lower L to upper L to middle, middle to high, high to post-secondary, from that standpoint. They traditionally meet anyway at the end of each year and have conversations of transitioning students over to the next level, but this will be more purposeful in terms of the bullying, both substantiated and unsubstantiated. Okay. 2, 3, and 4 all talk about all employees, all staff, all students, and parents in terms of the education we will be providing them, as well as training for all employees and education for our students, and how that will be rolled out in August of each year. How we'll continue to educate students throughout the year at the building level. That we will have conversations to determine what that training will look like in preparation for August. And then putting this out for public consumption via website, so on and so forth, in terms of what our policies and procedures are going to be.
I like that. Yeah, it really is. And again, consistency, right? So everybody's on the same page. I think that's really great. Any other questions or concerns about that? No? Okay, fantastic. Thank you both for your work.
Is this a first
First
read?
reading. Yes. Yes. Thank you for your work on that and for the committee's work. Are you continuing to meet with the committee, or is it kind of, Are you continuing to meet, or is it?
That will continue to be an active task
Okay,
force, especially as we continue with the rollout of potentially new trainings that occur for the staff and the
Okay.
students. It may not meet as frequently, but certainly it'll be active in terms of coming together when we need to.
Okay.
I think a great thing too for the task force would be is if, once we have the data that gets reported into SEPI and the same data that we shared with the board to start the school year, it might be interesting to have some data analysis year over year in some of those areas and see where, obviously there wouldn't be a significant change this year necessarily, but as we begin to roll this out and anticipating what those shifts in definition may do to that overall data set.
That'd be great.
Okay, well, I want to thank Mr. Etu for all his work leading this charge. I wish, the one wish I had from my lens, because this is such a serious issue, it's an emotional issue for families, is that I could have you listen in on our teams at our schools, from the teacher to the social workers, to the ESAPs, to the ESTs, to the principals, and the considerable care they take whenever there is any of these situations that arise in any of our buildings. I realize that sometimes in your lens, you hear about the situations, Ms. Bonifield, as you mentioned, that maybe don't go the way someone anticipated. But what's beautiful about this, just like with your previous conversation, it's a reboot. It's a look at it again with fresh eyes. And I look forward in our next study session to review with you some of those exact transition activities we're doing. I just met with Upper Elementary last week. They've provided me all those activities, not only from a student lens, from the individual student lens, from the building lens, from the parent lens, that they're doing for their incoming fourth graders and their exiting sixth graders. So that's a big part of this work, in addition to the social emotional learning we do each day. So, but I recognize to our community, this is a big topic and one that we take seriously.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Okay, anything else? We're going to move on to personnel goals and objectives, GAA, Mr. Abate and Mrs. Keats. Kevin?
Hello.
Are we happy to move on to easy stuff? So this policy is pretty straightforward. We had, it is a policy that has hasn't been looked at in some time, but it essentially lays out the district's goals for how we want to handle personnel. And Jen and I felt like if we're going to do a rewrite, we should make it match our collective commitments, our shared vision. And so that's what we set out to do. And it really covers the concepts of seeking, attracting, recruiting staff, providing competitive compensation and quality benefits, promoting collaborative efforts among our staff members, developing professional growth that's meaningful to staff, enhancing employee capacity, promoting morale through positive environments and safe and welcoming schools, et cetera, et cetera. So we think it expands substantially and appropriately from what we had originally, and we're open to thoughts and comments.
Any questions or concerns? Again, this is, like you said, it's about attracting and retaining staff and the compensation. So is there any, I was going to read, but you covered all of it.
Yeah, did you? I didn't know if you wanted me to do it word for word, so I just kind of hit the key.
Highlighted it all. Yes, thank you. Anything else? Are we good?
This looks great. Yeah, it looks good.
Thank you very much for that.
All right.
It's great, and I think it's wonderful that we're looking at this and we're trying to say what best fits what our current practice is and how to rate. Thank you. What's our best practice and what are the best practices out there and what are we doing to match, or what are we saying our policy is to match our current practices? So thank you for looking into this.
Absolutely.
Okay. Board policy GBN, personnel, separation of certified personnel.
Mrs. Frank, sorry.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry,
that's
Mrs. Acosta.
going to
Oh, first reading.
First reading.
Yes, sorry, next.
Good to go?
Yep.
All right, so this one is another vintage 1988 policy that needed just a little bit of tweaking. It originally stated that it was about the specific separation of certified staff, but it actually spoke really more to employment status as a whole, not just the concept of separation. So we changed the title there, and we reordered the sentences so that it just flowed more logically, beginning with the superintendent or designees. I think that was supposed to be a correction there. I don't know if maybe I have the wrong one up here. Are you seeing still the copy that has the apostrophe S on the superintendents and the designees?
Yeah, apostrophe.
Okay, I corrected that, but I'll make sure you guys get the right one. That one didn't make it in for some reason, but that is fixed in the proper in the proper policy. And then, so that just, it leads off with talking about the superintendent designee's recommendation for these staff, and then goes on to talk about our procedures for handling those items. So it's all in order. It's in a logical order. Before that last sentence was, well, the first sentence was last, and it was hard to follow.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds much better.
Questions or concerns with that one? No? We'll add that to the first reading, Mrs. Acosta, for next week as well. Okay, board policy personnel GBQ retirement systems. Mr. Abate, Mrs. Keats.
Sorry, I'm just pulling that
That's okay.
from the board book to make sure I'm looking at the same thing you are.
Okay.
Yes, we got an assist on this one from the lovely Allison Smith, who went on and helped us make certain that we are laying out our retirement, well, essentially the state's retirement policies and the way that we administer those through our district. So it was, we just had some out-of-date language that was quite old, and now it is fitting.
Perfect. And again, it matches the law.
It matches
It's
the law.
not really ours, it's, I mean, it matches the law.
Yes, it is not LPS, it is the state of Michigan.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, any other questions? That will be another first reading, Mrs. Acosta, okay. Moving on to board policy personnel GBRA, physical examination of employees.
Yeah, so the, we tweaked the title here a little bit to say medical, because I think that's just a little bit more appropriate, maybe more, well, just more appropriate for that particular policy. And then this was just a simple one-liner that had said that we have the right to do this. We felt like it would be appropriate to expand that out, our rationale for how and when we might do this, and to note that these are things that are, you know, that are allowable by law and collective bargaining and so forth. And then, of course, we make some notation toward the end there about, you know, how folks are referred to physicians of the district's choosing, and how that process is played out through HR. So it takes the single line we used to have and expands out what it actually means in some detail.
Yeah, that's great. And I think we had lots of discussion during our study session about what to call the doctor. And I think this really hits what we were talking about. The physicians of the district's choosing will submit a copy. I think that's really, really good wording for what all of our concerns that were brought to the board table. Any other questions? Fantastic. Thank you so much.
All right.
And that brings policy committee to an end. President Burton Bradford.
Mrs. Frank, you did an excellent job. Everybody else did too. All right. Moving on to item 8, Personnel Committee. Mr. Johnson?
You know, looks like we don't have anything. Mrs. Alquist?
We do not. Would you like to add something?
That was quick.
Wow, that's amazing. All right. Item 8, Legislative Committee. Mrs. Jarvis?
Thank you. We don't currently have anything on the agenda, but I'm sure we could take something out. Mrs. Oquist?
We do not.
I guess you're off the hook.
But we are keeping a close eye on budgets to come out from the House and the Senate. There is a little bit of action on the retirement funding. We will certainly keep you posted, and if there may be a legislative action alert that I'll send to you just with some talking points that may be helpful.
Super.
Okay, we'll watch for it. Okay. Well, is there any other business for tonight? If there is none, then we are adjourned. Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.